Recording in progress.
Buenos días.
Good morning.
Bienvenidas y bienvenidos
Welcome
al Seminario Internacional
to
Conocimiento
this
Abierto,
international seminar
actividad
on Open Knowledge,
organizada por la Agencia
an
Nacional de
activity
Investigación y
organized
Desarrollo
by the
ANID,
National
el Consorcio
Agency
para el Acceso a la Información Científica
for
y
Investigation
Científica
and
del
Development
CTCI.
of Chile.
Agradecemos que estén siguiendo esta
We
transmisión
thank
a través del canal de ANID en YouTube,
this
desde
transmission,
donde estaremos transmitiendo
where you can see
en
it
inglés
in
y
the
también en español, por
YouTube
supuesto.
channel of ANID, the National
Damos la
Agency for
bienvenida a las
Investigation and Development.
autoridades que hoy nos
We
acompañan.
also welcome the authorities who
Este
accompany us
seminario
today.
se realiza en un contexto muy especial.
This seminar is in a very
La
special
Semana
context.
Internacional del Acceso Abierto.
We are in
Un
the middle of
compromiso
the
que como
International
agencia
Week of
tenemos
open
Para que el
knowledge. So as an
conocimiento
agency,
financiado con fondos del Estado
we
sea un
need to be
bienestar
sure that
abierto,
knowledge financed
accesible
with
por todas
public
y todos,
funds should be open to everybody and usable by
dos
everybody.
días a importantes
So we're bringing
especialistas
together
de Chile y
during
del
2 days
extranjero que
important
abordarán
specialists
temas
from
como
Chile
el
and
conocimiento como
international
bien público. Nos
to
presentarán
talk about
experiencias
knowledge as
internacionales
a
de acceso
public good
abierto, compartirán
and
también
international
oportunidades y
projects of
desafíos
open
en la
access
implementación de políticas
and sharing
públicas, entre otras
challenges
relevantes temáticas.
to create public
Hoy
policies.
realizaremos interesantes presentaciones y veremos también paneles de conversación.
Today we're going to have very interesting
Invitadas de
presentations
Alemania, España, Francia,
and with
Holanda,
people
Reino Unido,
invited from
Brasil,
Germany,
Argentina y Chile.
Brazil,
Quienes nos
Argentina,
compartirán sus
Holland.
visiones sobre el acceso a la
So they're going to share
información
their
y la
visions
ciencia
about
abierta.
access to
Y
information
bueno,
and open
ya para
science.
comenzar, quisiera
So to
invitar
start
a la
with,
subsecretaria de Ciencia,
I'd like
Tecnología,
to
Conocimiento e Innovación,
invite the
Carolina Torrealba,
Sub-Secretary of
a
Science,
compartir
Technology,
con nosotros.
Knowledge and Innovation,
Subsecretaria, bienvenida.
Carolina Torrealba,
Hola,
to share
muchas
her
gracias,
view.
Jimena, por la
Hello,
bienvenida
thank you
a
very much,
este
Ximena, for the
seminario.
welcome
Yo quiero,
and for this
obviamente,
seminar.
que dar la bienvenida a todas las personas que
I would like
van
to
a
welcome
participar en este seminario. Y
everybody who
poner
is
un breve
participating in the
contexto.
seminar and mark
Este
the
seminario
context.
de conocimiento abierto, digamos,
This
bien
seminar of
apela
open
a
knowledge
uno de los nombres que tiene nuestro ministerio, que tiene un nombre bastante largo. Y yo aún recuerdo el día de
I remember
inauguración
when the Commission
del Congreso se decidió incorporar
of Congress
el nombre
decided to
conocimiento
incorporate
a
the
ministerio,
word
que
knowledge
se llamaba
into
Ciencia,
the
Tecnología e
title
Innovación.
of the
Principalmente respondía a demandas
ministerial, which was before just
orientadas a que el sector de las ciencias sociales, de las
so
humanidades,
oriented
particularmente
towards
la
the
investigación en
sector
las
of
artes,
social
también,
sciences
no se
and
sentían
especially
identificadas en
investigation.
la nomenclatura y,
They
como bien
did
saben,
not feel
la palabra es
identified with
autoridades,
the name of the
y se
ministry.
consideró en ese minuto que era fundamental incorporar la palabra
So
conocimiento.
we decided that it
Sin
was
embargo,
really
ha pasado
important
el
to
tiempo
bring the word knowledge into the
y
title of the
ya
ministry.
casi vamos a cumplir pronto 2 años de la instalación
So
de esta
we'll soon
institución.
be 2
Que ha
years
estado
old.
cargada obviamente que de mucha contingencia, pandemia,
It's been a
respuesta,
very demanding
en
period
el que el
due to the
conocimiento
pandemic,
y la ciencia en el
in
mundo
which knowledge and science
han
in the
tenido una
world
reflexión bien profunda respecto de su impacto sobre el
have
desarrollo
had a
humano,
very deep
debido a lo
reflection
instrumentales que son para
on their
enfrentar cualquier
impact on
desafío,
development,
como la pandemia o
and they are
cualquier
instruments
desafío
to respond to any
como los que
challenge,
sabemos que van a venir en el siglo XXI.
like what
Esto
we
nos
know is going
lleva
to come.
básicamente a la reflexión que la palabra conocimiento es mucho más amplia.
This
Implica
makes
mucho
us
más
reflect
que
that the idea of knowledge
incorporar
is very,
áreas
very wide.
que de alguna
It's much
manera
more
no se
than just
sienten
incorporating
interpeladas cuando se habla de ciencia y
certain
tecnología.
sectors.
Conocimiento es distinto que investigación. Conocimiento
Knowledge
es
is
distinto que
different
los
from
productos de
investigation,
investigación, que papers
and
y
knowledge is
papeles.
different from the products of investigation.
Y en ese contexto me parece
In this context,
absolutamente
it seems to me
muy pertinente este
very
seminario,
pertinent,
busca precisamente
this
ampliar esta
seminar,
reflexión.
because
¿Qué
it's looking
implica?
to
¿Qué
widen this
rol tiene que
reflection,
tener este ministerio en promover la
asking what role does this ministry
conocimiento?
have in moving
¿Y
different
cómo
forms
se
of
va a
knowledge?
abordar desde
How is
esta
this going to
tribuna
be
para que ese
approached
conocimiento fluya y impacte en
so that
nuestra
this
sociedad?
knowledge flows and has an
También
impact in
comentarles que
society?
finalmente yo soy una convencida que el factor más
Finally,
importante para
I'm convinced that the most
sociedad
important
preparada para
factor for
reaccionar al
creating
futuro será la profesión
a
social de la
resilient
ciencia y el
society
conocimiento. Ya
is
definitivamente
the
no
impact
basta
of
con que la
science and
ciencia, esto lo
knowledge.
vimos en la pandemia, por ejemplo, no basta con que la
We saw in the
ciencia
pandemic, it's not enough
o la
that
política,
science
¿cierto?, declaren que las personas deban vacunarse o deban usar
or
mascarillas.
that
Es
the political
fundamental que las
presidents should say
personas
that they
tengan
be
las herramientas para poder
vaccinated.
tomar sus
It's very important that people have their own
entiendan por
tools
qué
to be able
estas
to
medidas,
make
que
their own
en estos
decisions
casos pueden
and
vulnerar
understand
su
why these
libertad
measures,
incluso, son importantes para proteger.
which impacted on
Este
their
ejemplo
freedom,
lo
they're
vivimos
important for
tan,
everybody. This example
fuertemente hoy día, digamos,
lived so
se va a
tensely
trasladar a otras esferas. ¿Cómo
is
vamos a
now going to
abordar
infect
una
other
crisis
spheres.
global en
How would
materia
we
de
confront
sequía, de uso del
a
agua? Si
global
vamos a usar o no
crisis on
ciertas
water use?
tecnologías, si vamos en el futuro a
What
implantarle un
technologies will
chip
we
a un
use?
ser querido, comprender
What
que lo que es un
would
producto
our dear
automatizado, quién lo va a controlar,
robots implantation of chips, who's going to control that? Temporary society is going to need that everybody, not just an intellectual elite, can understand the phenomena which we need to react to. So I think that it's very important to have this basic scientific technological knowledge and this open knowledge and the social appropriation of this knowledge. It needs open knowledge, which is kind of the basis for people to be able to take autonomous and informed decisions around socially agreed objectives. Maybe never before, the development of our country and world had been so conscious of science and technology. How science and technology are crucial for the well-being of our societies. Before, it was more seen as intellectual, as a question intellectual. It's now massified due to the market experience of the pandemic. It's also, there's an expectation from the public to see what's happening in the world. Today, Chile has the opportunity to prepare itself for the challenges to come and for the profound social impact, and to make the most of the opportunity to develop knowledge for a better society. But despite this, for this to happen, we not only need to grow our capacities for investigation, the general capacity, more people involved in investigation, not just this. We also need to, this is fundamental, need to think about how to administer, manage, and systemize knowledge, how to make sure this knowledge enables us to develop papers. But there is also this huge context, which is open knowledge. And how do we make this available to society in general through different public policies? New innovations, for example, what enabled us to respond to the pandemic. These are going to be very important to respond to the challenges. We need new formulas because they're complex challenges.
Creo que este momento no deja de ser absolutamente pertinente para esta reflexión. Así que con eso quiero cerrar,
So I'd like to close with this. I'd like to thank and congratulate to the National Agency and its director, who have taken on this reflection with a lot of depth and have made it transversal. This new agency, which is now going to be 2 years old. So thank you very much for everybody again, whether you're public or whether you're speaking. We're beginning, but consolidating a reflection which is going to have a lot of impact. Thank you very much.
Secretaria, muchísimas gracias por acompañarnos.
Secretary, thank you very much for being with us this morning.
Bien, y ahora voy a dejar
Now,
ustedes a la directora
I'm going to leave you with the National Director of the National Agency for Investigation and Development of Chile, Aysen Echeverría. Thank you very much, everybody. Welcome to everybody who's connected. It's difficult to think in the words to open this event, to open this event, which is one of the most important the agency has done, and to think how to give a good context. I'd like to share some reflections with you. The first is to do with the creation of the national agency. It's created by the ministry as a recognition of the maturity of our scientific system, and to recognize desde public policy the challenges of our ecosystem. These challenges have been the focus of the agency since the first day. We started to work between disciplines. We got involved in questions of evaluation and how to improve. We're in a process of continual improvement. Last year we had an international seminary connected to what to talk about today. We have talked about work, the precarity of jobs in the science system, and thinking about a more diverse science. And lastly, we focus on the concept of knowledge. It's a concept that we use a lot, but we don't always have a profound sense of it. Why is it important, knowledge? Knowledge is today permits us to understand the universe, to understand nature, to understand our context, the social phenomena that are happening, to understand our health, and even to understand ourselves. And this knowledge is produced not just by scientific investigation, it also comes from our history, from social practices, from ancestral knowledge, from culture. The concept of knowledge is a transversal knowledge, where scientific investigation is one of the components which contributes to the construction of knowledge. This challenge of how to reflect and how to approach the challenge of knowledge in it altogether, we made an internal reflection. So what does scientific knowledge have in common with culture, knowledge from culture or from ancestral peoples? And the response is a concept that is often used. Knowledge has an essential characteristic, which means that we can all use it at the same time and it doesn't run out. This is a very important fundamental characteristic. It makes us able to dream that it can be made the most of by everybody. And it also means that we can look for alternatives to make the most of it. So the form in which we've approached this challenge of knowledge has been from protection. We've developed many tools, incentives, and capacities for intellectual property. It's a way of protecting knowledge, and so that it's no longer a public good. We have within the scientific ecosystem a practice and a mechanism for publication, which is another form of protecting and privatizing the knowledge. But there are spaces where knowledge is open and where it needs to be open. So the tools like papers and intellectual property are not adequate for approaching this. So this is what we call open knowledge today. So from the work of the ministry and the agency, from public policy, we can recognize this characteristic of knowledge and implement strategies and tools and incentives which enable us to make the best use of it for the good of society. So this is difficult to do. So now we're approaching it from different areas. We think it's very important to visualize. And this seminary has this objective, to understand that the management of knowledge and making the most of it, it's not just about protecting it, not just about scientific divulgation. It's all the activities which permit that we all benefit and that we can all use it. This role is not just for investigators, but it's also the universities and the agency and libraries are very important link in the chain. The second is talk about this public good question. So intellectual property is very good for some things and it has a value, but it's not applicable to all forms of knowledge, all the forms of business. So there is a space that we're developing. We think there's a lot to do. The agency has a very important role without leaving on one side intellectual property. They're complementary. This complementarity requires efforts from both sides. Thirdly, we need to invest in making available the knowledge. Knowledge is not used like air. We need to have tools, generate capacities we need to invest so that this knowledge can be accessible for everybody. This process we've started this year. We're making an effort that will be permanent to finance projects, generating capacities in our universities, especially as libraries, in order to manage tools and culture connected to access to knowledge. All this together enables us to say that we're beginning a movement that is not just in Chile or Latin America, it's worldwide, which is to do with open science and promotes standards of use of this knowledge in an open way, following practices that we're going to learn about today in the seminar. The agency has been working since 2020, since the beginning of the pandemic, working with tools to put this discussion in front of us all, generate capacity in our ecosystem. Today in this seminary, we're putting these pieces together. On one side, we have resources, the universities. On the other hand, we have a public policy of open access, which was approved publicly last year. And finally, we have what we most value, the confidence and agreement of all the universities. For last week, we signed an agreement to generate a network of support for an infrastructure of access. Basically, our agency with the universities, we agreed to act together around open access and think together, how can we generate these alternative models for ultra models of access to knowledge instead of the closed system. Today, what we would like to do is provoke a wider discussion. So that's why, along with the national and international guests, we also invited political candidates who are dreaming and working for the future of our country. So we asked the candidates to send videos about how they consider knowledge and what is the role they give it in their political programs as science and knowledge as a tool for developing our country. So during the ceremony, we'll be able to listen to various political candidates, including Marco Enriquez shared a video. So we're not talking just about presidential elections, but it's also very important the constitutive assembly, so they can tell us what they're thinking about knowledge in the assembly. So it's being treated in a transversal way. It's very relevant in the assembly. So I'd like to invite you to enjoy the seminary. It's looking to go further than scientific knowledge because it's looking to show experiences of people who have been working for years in open knowledge and somehow to reflect together. What does knowledge mean? Not just science. It's also about culture. It's also about heritage. And so this experience of sharing together, that's what's going to enable us as a common agency and all those who are connected together to have a deep reflection and serious about open access to knowledge and how knowledge can really contribute to the development. So please enjoy the ceremony. We're very happy to have been able to organize it, and we hope that you enjoy it. So, so now let's go with the plenario.
switch to English to introduce our keynote speaker in the seminar today. I'm going to start by reading her bio, and then I'm going to just say a brief words to end the introduction. So our keynote speaker is Julia Reda. She is a copyright expert and leads the project Control C. Control C is a German strategic fundamental rights litigation NGO, GFF. Between 2014 and 2019, Julia was a member of the European Parliament, where she focused her work on the European Union Copyright Directive and the regulation of online platforms. Julia is a Shuttleworth Fellow and an affiliate of the Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society at Harvard University. This is her official bio. Julia has become also a very good friend of our agency. We contacted her a couple of weeks ago with this crazy idea of organizing a seminar on open knowledge in a country that I know she has never been. She took the enterprise with great generosity and with the most extreme professionality, I would say. She not only studied and researched on what is going on with Chile, but she also helped us to create a story around open knowledge that I believe it's going to be very useful for the discussion we want to have through this seminar and for many, many months after that. So Julia, thank you so much for your kindness, and we look forward to your presentation.
Thank you very much. It's a great honor to be able to speak at the National Agency of Research and Development in Chile. And I would like to especially thank the director for making this really a global conversation, because I think that open knowledge really is a global quest that unites everybody around the world. And I'm speaking today from Berlin, Germany. And indeed, I have not spoken in Latin America before, so it's a great honor to be here. I will start sharing my presentation so that the technical team can also bring it up on the screen. So I see this is working. Excellent. Thank you very much. Yes, so I would like to structure my intervention today around open knowledge as a broader theme, because I am really convinced that today we cannot live without open knowledge anymore. I think this has become very clear during the pandemic that the world has never faced greater challenges. And even though I think the last 2 years have been very difficult, I would like to invite you to imagine how much more difficult this crisis would have been to manage without the internet, without the possibility for people to continue researching from their homes, to continue innovating together on things like the vaccine development, but also simply to keep working from home, to keep the economy running. And the internet is, I think, perhaps the most important example of open innovation and open knowledge that we have seen. There is no CEO of the internet. There is no centralized authority that is running the internet, but rather it's a decentralized system that is built on collaboration and is based on the sharing of technical protocols between experts from all kinds of different countries. And I think this is exactly the kind of approach that we are really going to need to address the challenges that are ahead of us, not just with the pandemic, but also with climate change, for example. I think today, really, the decisions that are made in one part of the world can have a global effect really quickly. And this is not an altogether new development. I actually want to illustrate this on a rather old example that you may have heard about before. This is the story of the Carmenère. Carmenère is one of the most ancient and prestigious French grape varieties that comes from the French region of Bordeaux. And in 1867, an insect pest, the phylloxera plague, wiped out the Carmenère in France pretty much completely. This was an insect that attacks the roots of the grapevines, and the Carmenère grape variety, which was extremely prestigious in France, was presumed to be extinct. And this was the case until 1994, when the Carmenère was actually rediscovered in Chile, where Chilean wine growers have been preserving this important wine variety for 150 years. And for quite a long time during that period, it was thought to be a variety of Merlot. So the Carmenère couldn't have just survived anywhere in the world, but it was actually quite important that it was brought to Chile and was grown there, because due to Chile's more isolated growing environment, the phylloxera plague, which spread around large part of the planet, actually never spread to these areas. So thanks to this happy accident, Europeans today can actually enjoy Carmenère wine imported from Chile once again today. Nowadays, also in Europe, of course, the wine growers have found ways to deal with the phylloxera problem. New grafting techniques have been developed that allow wine to be grown in France once again. And now French wine growers are actually having a renewed interest in perhaps reintroducing the Carmenère also to Europe. So I think this story shows the importance of redundancy in the sharing of knowledge. So just because you have a perfect system in your country for growing wine, for example, that doesn't mean that you should prevent others from sharing in that knowledge, because they may be using it in a different way. They may be using it under different circumstances, different environmental conditions. And in the end, if we share the knowledge that we have, we may end up benefiting from that in the future if something goes wrong in our country. So I think it's important to note, though, that while this was quite a happy accident, not all knowledge is accidentally saved in this way. Quite a lot of knowledge is destroyed. And when, for example, a library or a museum or a national monument is destroyed in a natural disaster, this is a global tragedy. We hear about it in the news and so on. And one such example in Germany was the fire of the Anna Amalia Library in 2004. This was a very important historical building that housed over 150 books that were damaged or destroyed during this fire in 2004. And the restoration efforts to try to save these books actually continue to this day. But unfortunately, some of the books housed there were lost forever. And in this case, the rescue came too late. They were actually knowing that there was something wrong with the building. They were working on building a new vault, but it was not finished in time. So this fire actually ended up destroying a large part of the collection. Now, this fire back in 2004 made global news, but what we don't talk so much about is that virtual decentralized libraries burn down every day on the internet in a metaphorical sense. Every day, knowledge is lost without anybody lamenting it or even knowing about it in many cases. And this is happening on a much smaller scale. So just to give a practical example, the UK public broadcaster BBC used to throw away recordings of all TV shows that it had produced. There were several reasons for this. They didn't have enough space to archive all of their TV programs, but also the actors' unions at the time were lobbying against the repetition of TV shows on television to make sure that they would always have enough work. So the BBC actually threw away old recordings of TV productions on a regular basis for economic reasons. And nowadays, TV shows like Doctor Who have become really a national treasure. It's perhaps the oldest, most well-known science fiction TV series. And nowadays, the BBC is actually investing a lot into trying to find the lost episodes that they have thrown away decades before. And they're not telling people that it's a problem that they have private copies of those works, but rather they're thanking people who return parts of the collections to the BBC. And they have found individual episodes in TV stations in Australia, Nigeria, all around the world. Even some episodes were found in the basement of a church for some reason. But some of the episodes were never recovered. And the more time has passed, the harder it becomes to try to recover them. So the same thing is also happening on the internet. There is a mass destruction of knowledge that is going on a daily basis. One of the great things about the internet is that you can link to information that is available in a different place. But studies at the Berkman Klein Center at Harvard University have shown that even this strength of the internet, of decentralization, also has a negative side, which is that nobody feels responsible for making sure that the information behind links actually remains available. So my colleagues, the researchers at the Berkman Klein Center, have found that out of all the articles in the New York Times, 25% of the links included in those articles no longer work. In the case of links in opinions of the United States Supreme Court, it's even 50%. And in some research articles in the Harvard Law Review, as much as 75% of the links no longer work. And the further you go back in time, the worse this problem gets. So if you have a book, this can be preserved for hundreds of years. But the internet is actually really bad at preserving information, even for a few decades. So this is why, for example, the Wikipedia, which is once again a very excellent open knowledge project, is working actively with the Internet Archive to try to prevent this link rot. So to make sure that there are copies available of all the links to sources. So what I want to show with this example of the destruction of information that is available on the internet is that open knowledge and an open knowledge strategy is more than just allowing everybody to access everything. There also needs to be an active management of knowledge. So that means that agencies need to provide infrastructure and really take responsibility for the preservation and the sharing of knowledge. I want the open knowledge on the internet to be seen as urgent as knowledge in the physical world, because the destruction of knowledge is going on every day. But you don't have these dramatic pictures of a burning building if information gets lost because a server gets shut down somewhere. Nevertheless, sometimes all that stands between open knowledge and the destruction of knowledge is just a few days. I want to illustrate this on the basis of another story of a library. So in this picture, you can see the library of the University of Cape Town, which holds a huge collection of historical documents about the political history of South Africa. And part of this important collection is the video archive of the treatment action campaign. So in the 1990s, a community media trust in South Africa started training local HIV activists in the use of camcorders. And this NGO, the Treatment Action Campaign, started filming all of its activities. So protests, memorials, campaign meetings that they were having. And this is very important historical material because these activists are really the precursor of the activists for access to the COVID-19 vaccine today, for example. And this video archive was given to the library at the University of Cape Town, but the videos were in outdated video formats. And quite recently, some documentary filmmakers approached the UCT library to ask if they could digitize those videos to make a documentary. And in the beginning, the library was relatively hesitant to give access to these filmmakers. And I guess this is because sometimes libraries forget that the primary purpose of preservation is not the preservation itself, it's to make sure that people can use the knowledge. But luckily, eventually the documentary filmmakers were able to convince the library to open this archive and allow the filmmakers to digitize the archives. Unfortunately, at the beginning of this year, the UCT library was destroyed in a bushfire. And in hindsight, I suppose it was a great luck that this collaboration could happen in time, because the last videos from this important collection were taken from the library just 1 week before the fire happened. So they were able to digitize the videos just in time. And even though this section of the library was destroyed, the filmmakers can now share the digital copies of the videos that they have digitized back with the library. And so this collection, which is very important for the history of the country, was able to be saved. So what I want to show with this story is that often the ones who benefit from sharing are the ones who do the sharing in the first place. The biggest challenge of digitizing these videos was actually that they were available in an outdated video format. So technology changes all the time. And if you wait too long in sharing information that you have, maybe there won't be anybody who can use this data anymore. This is also true for open access research. It's not just important to share the results of your research, but also to document the underlying data in a way that other people can understand it and to reproduce your results. So when we talk about potential dangers of sharing, what we overlook is that quite often when we give something to others to share, we are also making it easier for ourselves to use it. So I don't know if you've ever had this experience that you go back to an article that you wrote yourself and published on the internet to read about your own knowledge. This is something that happens to me quite often. If I write something down so that others can understand it, it will also be easier for myself to go back to that knowledge and to understand or remind myself of research that I've done in the past. An example of this principle is the Internet Archive. So if you want to preserve culture, for example, video games, there are two ways that you could do this. You could either collect old physical copies of computers and video games and put them in a museum. But the problem with that is if you go back to it 20 years later, the storage media will probably not work anymore because they deteriorate over time. The file formats don't work anymore on new computers. And you probably can't find any engineers who understand the old programming languages anymore. The Internet Archive has a different approach. Instead of trying to preserve just the physical copies, the Internet Archive has built an emulator that allows regular internet users like you and me to play those old video games in their browser. And this also means that as soon as a new browser version gets released and people start using new technology, if the video game stops working, the users will tell the Internet Archive that there is a problem. So in this way, whenever something stops working, you can interfere right away and make sure that you convert the information to a new format so it doesn't get lost. So actually the users of an archive are also providing an important service to the library or the archive. So as the director has said in her introductory speech, the sharing of knowledge is really not a zero-sum game. By focusing on fears associated with sharing, we overlook that if one organization ends up sharing information, they don't have less just because somebody else has more. So we have to try to develop virtuous cycles of sharing, where one country shares information with the world and thereby encourages other countries to do the same. And in the end, this creates a virtuous cycle for all participants. So a successful open knowledge policy has to combine several elements. One is sharing culture. So this is quite a lot actually about telling stories of the successes associated with data sharing. So these stories actually inspire people to become entrepreneurs, to imagine how to innovate and create something new based on the information that is already available to them for free. Open knowledge ecosystems also need infrastructure. So that means the state needs to take an active role in knowledge production, for example, by funding research and by requiring that the result of research is published as open access, and by also providing access to companies, to civil society that can actually create products on the basis of open knowledge. And finally, there also needs to be investment, because some goods will not be preserved by the market alone. But as myself being a politician, as it was mentioned, I was in the European Parliament while the EU copyright reform was negotiated. My main activity in this area has been in the area of the law, because laws have a big influence on open knowledge, especially copyright law. So I want to just take a few minutes to talk about some of the copyright reforms that we have undertaken in the EU that play an important role in this area. So the Digital Single Market Directive was the initiative that was undertaken by the European institutions in the last 5 years. And it's based on the problem that every country in the EU has its own national copyright law. And this causes a lot of problems for knowledge sharing, because there are differences, for example, in terms of what information you're allowed to use in a classroom. But of course, if the classroom is suddenly digital because the schools have to close and students are in different countries, then you have the question, well, which of those laws actually applies? So the solution is the creation of the digital single market, which means trying to reunite the different national laws into one system that allows the free flow of knowledge across borders. So sometimes copyright plays a role in technologies in a way that we don't expect it. And this was one of the topics that we looked at in this copyright reform. Artificial intelligence is an example of that. The way that the EU copyright system works is we don't have a fair use system, but rather every use of a copyrighted work needs to be explicitly permitted by the law. So for example, if you want to publish a work online, it needs to be permitted, for example, as a quotation or as a parody, and each of those exceptions is listed in the law. And so why does this lead to a problem for artificial intelligence? I want to illustrate this on a practical example to show how copyrighted works are used in the context of development of artificial intelligence. So recently, there was this presidential debate on CNN Chile between presidential candidates, and there was this exchange between candidates Sebastián Sichel and Jasna Provoste about Wikipedia. And I don't want to talk about the content of this exchange so much. I think Wikipedia Chile has responded very well to this discussion. But rather, I want to point out the fact that even though I don't speak any Spanish, I was able to listen to this TV debate and follow along with it. And this is because what you can see at the bottom of the screen, which is the automatic translation to English. It's, of course, far from perfect, but it's sort of good enough that anybody, even if they don't speak Spanish, can follow along with what is being said. And how does this work? Well, YouTube creates these automatic English subtitles, first by doing speech recognition and creating text from what was being said, and then in a second step, automatically translating the Spanish text to English. And the way that this is done is by training data. So you have an algorithm that gets trained with huge amounts of data. And of course, a lot of that data is copyright protected. So the problem that we have here is that if companies want to develop artificial intelligence, they actually need access to thousands and thousands of works or recordings of humans speaking, lots of texts in different languages, and so on. And if you had to negotiate a license for each and every one of those works, it would be impossible to do so because the cost of just talking to thousands and thousands of rights holders would be prohibitive. And actually, the artificial intelligence doesn't really care about the content of the individual works. It's not about the artistic creation. It's about learning patterns that repeat over thousands and thousands of works. So what these companies have been doing is to use open knowledge to try to improve their automatic translation systems. So for example, you may have noticed that automatic translation from Spanish to English is pretty good, but from Spanish to some smaller languages is often much worse. And this is not because smaller languages are somehow harder, but because there is less training data available. In the case of English and Spanish, well, for example, these are both languages of the European Union. And this is a huge source of freely usable text and audio files because the European Union has 24 official languages, and every member of parliament has the right to work in their own native language, which means all the texts get translated to all these different languages. There is simultaneous interpretation of all the speeches. And of course, all of this translation was created to have a functioning transnational democracy in the EU. But an unintended side effect of that was that we have created a huge set of training data for translation technologies. And now smart companies all around the world and researchers are able to use this public resource to create innovation in the form of translation software. So in this case, we are talking about public documents, but in the copyright reform, we also made sure that in the future, companies would not have to ask permission just for the purpose of using texts as training data. So here's an example of such a company. This is DeepL. It's a German automatic translation company. And I have chosen here an example of a Spanish news article about the presidential debate. And as you can see, I can now read Spanish news articles in almost perfect quality because there is this ability to use existing copyright protected texts for the benefit of automatic translation. And this basic service of automatic translation is even made available to people for free. So in the copyright reform, we have created these new EU-wide copyright exceptions, for example, for this data mining purposes, in order to make it easier to reuse content that is freely available on the internet. Another reform that we have done is about giving access to cultural heritage. What you see on this slide is an example of what cultural heritage access in the EU looked like so far. This is from Europeana, an online library of cultural heritage. And this is the number of works that are available in this online library from different years. And what you can see is that there is a lot from the 19th century and early 20th century, and there are a lot of new works, but in between there are quite few. And this phenomenon is called the 20th century black hole. The old works from the 19th century are available because they are no longer protected by copyright. So the library can just take them, put them online, and there are no legal problems. And there are quite a lot of new works because many rights holders actually want their works to be available and put them under free licenses, for example. In between, there is this black hole. This is works where the copyright has not yet expired, but it's also no longer actively managed by right holders. So the copyright usually lasts 70 years after the death of the author, but an average book is actually only sold commercially something like 10 years after publication. So there are lots and lots of works that are out of commerce. And what we've done in the copyright reform is to find a solution to allow libraries and archives to make these out-of-commerce works available online. So out-of-commerce means that the work is still protected by copyright, but it can no longer be bought in a shop. So this means by making this available, you're not actually destroying the economic interests of somebody else. And so what the libraries can do is they can announce online, okay, we have this collection of out-of-commerce works, we would like to make them available. And then the rights holders can say no, but quite often they don't do so because they no longer make money with the works and are actually fine with the publication. So this way, we hope that in the next years, we will be able to make lots and lots of cultural heritage from the EU available online for people to use. So I hope these two examples from the EU copyright law can show how we can encourage open innovation through changes in the law. But I want to close by also briefly talking about how open knowledge can improve a country's reputation in the world. Because what is very important when we talk about open knowledge is that innovators and researchers are inspired to become researchers by the images that they see growing up. So you can think perhaps of images of the moon landing that you have probably seen at some point in their life, or the fall of the Berlin Wall, or images of the night sky, whatever it may be that inspires you. And Chile, of course, is world leading in the area of astronomy research, and it's the host of a cutting-edge research facility in the form of the European Southern Observatory. And one great thing about the ESO is that it's not just great in terms of facilitating open access to research data, but it's also investing in open culture. So if you go to the website of the European Southern Observatory, you will see that all the pictures and texts and videos published there are under Creative Commons licenses. This means everybody can reuse those images made from public money and reuse them even for commercial purposes, whatever they would like to do. And this means that if you go to the Wikipedia page of ESO, you will see images like this one on this slide, which is not just educational, but also likely to inspire people to learn more about ESO and to learn more about Chile. Future generations of researchers, I believe, will want to come to Chile because they see images like this one, because they can modify these images, they can use them in their school presentations, they can use them in film projects or print them on Christmas cards or whatever they want to do, because humans are inherently curious. They want to innovate, and they're inspired by the beauty that they see in nature and also in research and artistic expression. And these curious and educated people, I think, are Chile's greatest resource. So an open knowledge policy is a way that the government can empower those people to make the most of their potential, to innovate, to research. And I believe that Chile is at a very exciting time in its history right now. A lot of change is undergoing. A lot of challenges, of course, are ahead. But I hope that this seminar will help to set the tone for a future for Chile that is built on collaboration, innovation, and access to knowledge. And I'm very glad to be able to speak in the context of this very important process. And I would like to especially thank the team of the National Research and Development Agency for the opportunity to share a little bit about our experience of promoting open knowledge in the copyright reform in Europe. And I'm very encouraged also to hear about the plans of the agency to promote open access in Chile and beyond. So thank you very much. This is my introductory remarks, and I very much look forward to hearing from all of you. Thank you.
Julia, thank you very much for joining us this morning. Muy bien, para quienes nos siguen desde el extranjero, quisiera contarles
so for those who are following this from abroad, so in the next few weeks there's a presidential election. So questions of knowledge and science and innovation are very important. So we wanted to invite the candidates. And in the next video is the vision of Jasna Provost on the role of science and technology in the development of our country. What is your vision on the role of knowledge, science and technology in the development of the country?
Todos los chilenos depende en gran medida del trabajo de nuestra comunidad científica y de la generación de conocimiento socialmente útil. Esta es la razón para apoyar como nunca antes en Chile la investigación.
We need to support more than ever in Chile scientific investigation. I'm convinced that our next government, we need to be working with knowledge. Knowledge illuminates our lives, it captures our imaginations, it lights up the imagination of young people to dedicate themselves to scientific investigation that Chile needs, to widen frontiers. We need that in order to be able to live in this complex, changing world of the century. The true development of this country is through knowledge, so that to improve the life of everybody. So in order to be able to transform the reality, science and technology need to be used with sense, so that it generates benefits for everybody, from new treatments in hospital, new sources of energy, new construction materials with a more sustainable architecture, new types of crops, new focuses on technology for rural economy, for protection of the environment, as well as our food security, amongst many other things. I'm optimist. I think that the role of knowledge in order to impulse our development and success as a country, we need to change from the extractivism and the inequality. Our future and our future of our children will depend on the use of the knowledge that we make in order to confront the challenges of order now, such as drought, and also be able to make the most of the economic opportunities of alternative energies. We need to support the next generation of investigators. So that's going to be the basis over which we build our future. So we need to increase the amount of scholarships, particularly in areas that the country needs knowledge. So there's plans of coming back to Chile to increase the capacity for analysis, so augmenting intelligence of the state. We will not repeat the energy of the era of this government. We'll have increased support for public institutions and the system of science that is already existing. So we'll improve the management of the state, eliminating bureaucracy. We will decentralize our efforts so that regional areas can develop and innovate. The regions need to be part of the scientific development, and so there'll be more resources for public science. The citizens will have access to scientific material developed with public funds, as well as the networks of culture of the Chilean state will have a plan of development for infrastructures for investigation, and we'll encourage the international and national collaboration. We'll be finding better instruments for the technological transfers. We hope that the military will also be more involved in science and technology. We're going to make a plan of social sciences and arts and humanity, as well as taking a census of biodiversity and policies for access in gender, because we want more leadership from women, so that's very important. So there's going to be public investment to generate scientific knowledge. It's going to be the most important initiative for this in Chile. Many ministries will increase their budgets for scientific and technological development. So we'll create new incentives for private investment in investigation, which will help to improve our economy. Our commitment is that science and technology be the central axis of this government for the production of knowledge, with social sustainability, ambient and environmental sustainability, to increase our social and economic heritage. The state will do its work. As a government, we will invest everything we can. But the relevance of science and technology cannot be solo supported by the state, and not only public sources. It also needs private initiatives. The private sector is in debt with us. We will wait for their commitment in the next years. What is your vision on the role of knowledge, science and technology for the development of the country? The most important challenge for our government is to invest in science in all its stages, from investigation to market. We need to have more investment in Chile in investigation, to develop projects on a technological base, and also projects which do scientific investigation. We know that the scientific investigation is basic for the country. We need to think about how over the next 30 years we need to resolve fundamental problems with our model of development, and also fundamental responses to challenges like the drought or the question of sustainable agriculture. So that these are transversal challenges, but scientists with public investment, we try to respond to these problems. What do we need? We need a government which trusts and invests in science, which collaborates with collective challenges, which responds to the challenges of the country. Obviously, more investment in all the stages of investigation. The country needs to understand that it's in science that are the great replies to the problems that confront us.
A continuación, daremos paso
So now
al primer panel de esta jornada.
we're going to have our first panel of the day.
Ustedes pueden seguir tanto en español como en inglés.
So you can follow that in
Esta
English
se
or in
titula
Spanish.
Experiencias internacionales en acceso abierto
This
al
panel
conocimiento.
is called
Será
International
moderada por Carolina
Experiences in
Reyes.
Open Access to Knowledge.
Ella es socióloga, posee un máster en
And it
estudios
will be
latinoamericanos
moderated
de la
by
Universidad
Carolina
de Chile
Gainza.
y es doctora en
She's a
Traducción
sociologue,
a Literatures de la Universidad de Pittsburgh.
and she's a
Además,
graduate from the
también es
University of
asociada
Pittsburgh.
de la Escuela de Literatura Creativa y directora del
She's
Laboratorio
part of the
Social de la Universidad
Creative
Universitaria.
Literature School
Además,
and works in the
es directora
university.
y codirectora de diversos proyectos de investigación.
She's
Actualmente
directed various
el proyecto
investigation
de
projects,
cartografía crítica de la literatura digital
and she's
latinoamericana.
now working on a
En
critical
sus
cartography
investigaciones,
of
ella ha abordado la cultura digital en
Latin
América,
American literature.
la producción cultural contemporánea y las estéticas digitales.
She's worked with this
Libros
digital
narrativas y
aesthetics
poéticas digitales en América
and
Latina,
narratives and poetics
literaria en
from
el capitalismo
Latin America
internacional de 2018,
and the production
la
of
batalla y la
literature.
galardón de artes y humanidades de
So some of these
2010
publications, she's made a lot of publications,
Bienvenida,
written books.
Carolina.
Welcome, Carolina.
Hola, muchas gracias por la invitación.
Hello, thank you very much for the invitation to moderate
Voy
this
a pasar
panel.
inmediatamente a presentar a los invitados.
So I'm going
quienes
to
van a
present
presentar
immediately
sobre
our
sus
guests.
proyectos hoy. Primero vamos a escuchar
First of
a
all,
Douglas
let's
McCarthy.
hear
Él es gerente
Douglas
de
McCarthy.
colecciones de Collections Engagement en Europeana Foundation. Douglas
He's in
McCarthy
charge of
tiene una
collections
maestría en
engagement
Historia
in
del
the
Arte de la
European
Universidad de
Foundation.
San Andrews.
He
Durante
has
las últimas 2 décadas,
he's
ha
graduated in
trabajado a
history of
nivel
art from the
internacional en
university.
museos
He's
públicos,
worked
colecciones de
internationally
arte
in
privadas y
public
artículos máximos
museums
en una
and
variedad de
private art
roles,
collections.
incluido el de gerente de estudio fotográfico,
And he's
investigador,
also
curador y gerente de
managed
exposiciones.
photographic collections as
Impulsor
well as
por
being
una
a
gran
curator and
curiosidad y
investigator.
un amor por la
He
cultura
has a
visual,
huge
Douglas es un
curiosity and love
apasionado
for
defensor de
visual
hacer que el
culture.
patrimonio cultural sea
He's passionate
abiertamente accesible
about
para
making
promover el
our
intercambio de
cultural
ideas y
heritage
contribuir a una próspera
openly
economía del
accessible,
conocimiento.
to have a prosperous
Luego de la
knowledge economy.
presentación de Douglas,
After
vamos a
Douglas,
tener con nosotros a Patricia Díaz,
we'll be listening to
directora
Patricia
de
Diaz.
Wikimedia Chile.
She's in charge of Wikipedia Chile.
Es comunicadora social y periodista
She's
de
a social
la Universidad de
communicator,
Magíster
and she's
en
from the
Comunicación
Chile
Política
University.
Local de la Universidad
She's
de
a
Orleans
master.
y
She has a
magíster en
master
Sociología del
from the University of
Desarrollo de la
Orleans,
Universidad,
and she's
Pantaleón Sorbona.
and she's a doctor in the
Actualmente es la
Sorbonne.
directora ejecutiva de Wikimedia
She's
Chile.
currently the
Ella
executive
coordinó
director of
el
Wikipedia
movimiento
Chile,
Wikimedia, desde donde promueve proyectos y
and
políticas de
the
acceso libre al
Chilean
conocimiento
sector
en los
of
entornos
Wikimedia,
digitales a
which
través del
promotes
enfoque de derechos humanos.
open knowledge access
Y también
through a
está con nosotros
human
hoy
rights
día
focus.
Cristina Dorador.
And we also
Ella es
have Cristina
estudiante,
Dorador with
doctora
us.
en ciencias naturales.
She's a
Cristina
biologist.
Dorador Ortiz nació en Antofagasta, vivió hasta los
She was born in
6 años
Antofagasta,
Mejillones, y luego en
and she lived
Antofagasta
up to
hasta
6
los
years
18
old in
años, desde
Mejillones.
donde se traslada a Santiago para estudiar una
And she arrived in
especialización en
Santiago
biología en la
with
Universidad de
18
Chile.
with 18 years old
Posteriormente realizó
when she
su
studied
doctorado y
biology
se
in Chile.
especializó
She
en
then did a
microbiología
doctorate
en Alemania. Tiene
in
formación
Germany.
musical y toca el
She also has a musical
Desde
training
el
and
2008 es académica de la Universidad
plays
de
the
Antofagasta,
double
donde
bass.
ha formado estudiantes de pre y posgrado y ha realizado investigación
She-
en ambientes extremos.
She trains her students and she also
Participa en
does
mujeres
investigation.
investigadoras, escribe
She's
artículos
part
de
of
divulgación y
groups of
espacios de
women
sociedades científicas.
investigators
Ha sido
and
consejera
writes
de CONICIT y ha participado en
articles of
distintos
scientific
comités de
divulgation
apoyo a la
and is a
investigación y desarrollo
member of a lot of
científico.
different commissions
Ha
for
escrito columnas de opinión y
scientific
ha
development in the
realizado
country.
distintas actividades sobre descentralización,
She's worked a lot with
preservación,
decentralization
turismo, medio
and
ambiente
preservation of
y
the
educación en las
environment
universidades, entre
confronted
otros.
with
Actualmente
extractivism.
integra la Convención Constitucional que tiene
She's now
previsto
part of the
redactar y aprobar la propuesta de texto
Constitutional
de la nueva
Convention,
Constitución
which
de
needs
la
to
República
write a
de
new
Chile.
constitution for the
Así
Republic
que
of Chile.
bueno, estos son nuestros invitados de hoy día.
So these are our
Los voy a
guests today.
dejar con Douglas McCarthy, quien va a
So
ser
I'll let you
nuestro
now
primer
I'll leave you now with Douglas McCarthy, who will be our first presentation.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me clearly.
Yes.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. I can hear some echo on my audio, so perhaps the host could mute themselves. Thank you. I'm going to share my screen now. I hope you can see my slide clearly. So I will continue. Good afternoon, everybody. Buenos dias. Greetings from Delft here in the Netherlands. Thank you very much for inviting me and Europeana to join this important event this week. Over the next few minutes, I would like to talk about open access to cultural heritage and to present some perspectives on the opportunities and the challenges of cultural heritage based on the experience of Europeana Foundation's work for the last 12 years, and to share with you some insights into the landscape today. Europeana, since its foundation, has been committed to the open knowledge and the open culture agenda. In 2010, Europeana published the Public Domain Charter. This is a document committing Europeana and the Europeana network to this statement: that having a healthy and thriving public domain is essential to the social and economic well-being of society. The Public Domain Charter puts forward the assertion that when works in the public domain, perhaps an old photograph or a manuscript or another artwork, are digitized, no new copyrights should be asserted over the digital objects that result. So what is in the public domain in the analog world, where copyright has expired or copyright never existed in the first place, they should remain public domain and open access and free of copyright when they are digitized and published online. Around the same time, the Open Knowledge Foundation put together its open definition. This, in summary, says that open means anyone can freely access, use, modify, and share for any purpose. The open definition has a list of open compliant licenses and rights statements. For example, the Creative Commons legal tool CC0, licenses like CC BY, the attribution license, CC BY SA, and a number of other open access legal tools, some of which there are local and national variations of. For example, the licence ouverte in France. All of these years later, the outcome of this policy of Europeana, one of the results is the Europeana website. Today, you can search and browse over 50 million records from 3,500 institutions. So these are data providers who Europeana aggregates their data into this portal. All of the metadata in Europeana is CC0, so completely copyright free. And the Europeana website is accessible in 24 languages, all the official languages of the European Union. Europeana presents inspiring cultural heritage from across Europe, from many different countries, many different languages and cultures at your fingertips to search and to browse. And in the last 12 months, the website was visited over 5 million times. And my work at Europeana focuses on editorial content development and marketing and engagement with users. Open knowledge at Europeana has many outcomes, one of which is what we call stories. These are high-value content, blogs and exhibitions developed for our audiences by Europeana and with our fantastic range of partners. The stories page of the Europeana website is a dedicated space that showcases these blogs and exhibitions in Europeana. We have over 1,000 pieces of content here. Yes, always in English, but also often in other languages, sometimes 3 or 4, sometimes 6, and on occasion an exhibition is available in all 24 languages of the European Union. All of the text of these exhibitions is openly licensed, and these cover many different topics such as folklore, the First World War, green and environmental issues, and Art Nouveau. On screen here we have an example of some Islamic heritage stories which we are highlighting. And here are some more examples of plants and animals, exhibitions about the natural world. And below you can see exhibitions and blogs about modernism and early 20th century art and culture. Zooming out, if we look at the global picture of Open GLAM, GLAM stands for Galleries, Libraries, Archives and Museums. This is a query generated from Wikidata, from a global survey of open access in cultural heritage that I have been co-leading for the last 3.5 years with Dr. Andrea Wallace at the University of Exeter in the UK. And this shows you the global current distribution of open access policy. There are just over 1,200 open institutions at the moment. But of course, this is a very, very small fraction, a small percentage of the total number of museums in the world. So full open access policy remains a very small minority of the overall picture. Closer to home, here in Chile, we have currently 4 different institutions who are recognized as having open access policies, shown on screen here. And if anyone in the audience knows of other ones which we haven't read and I should know about, please let me know. To summarize the challenges and opportunities that I see to cultural heritage today, the challenges include human, socio-economic and technical resources to drive and deliver open access policies in the culture space is demanding. It takes time, it takes effort, and it requires human expertise. Copyright itself is extremely complex, and this can create a risk aversion, a fear of copyright infringement on behalf of museums, many of whom do not have a dedicated legal or a copyright expert. So the complexity of copyright and the fear of being approached or sued means that the status quo is quite conservative, and that open access is not an easy and simple policy to develop. Of course, today there is still increasing pressure on museums to generate revenue from their assets and from their digital collections. On the positive side, I believe, Europeana believes, that open access offers local reach for digital cultural collections in your town, in your region, in your city, in your local linguistic communities. And it also is a great way for your collections to become better known outside of your region and around the world, because open access museum collections can be, for example, used and displayed to illustrate Wikipedia articles, other forms of open knowledge, and then, of course, translated. Open access empowers knowledge, education, and creativity in society. And I also think that in our global village today, making your knowledge and your collections openly available can drive intercultural, interfaith, and intercommunity understanding, which in our digital world is more important than ever. Thank you.
Thank you, Douglas, for your presentation. Your amazing presentation is really amazing. Europeana is a really amazing project for open access in culture. Entonces, ahora voy a cambiar a español y vamos a presentar
So now I'm going to change to Spanish.
Invitada,
I'm going to present our next
directora
guest,
ejecutiva de
Patricia
Wikimedia
Díaz,
Chile.
Executive Director of Wikipedia Chile.
Hola Carolina, hola a
Hello,
todos y a todas quienes nos están viendo.
Hello,
Muchas
everybody.
gracias por la invitación.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
Voy entonces a compartir mi pantalla también.
So I'm going to share my screen as well.
Y eso sí, agradeceré que me indiquen si es que se ve bien.
So please tell me if you can see it well.
Y desactivar los subtítulos. Espero que se vea bien, ¿o no? Ok, partiré entonces.
Sí, se ve perfecto.
Perfecto, gracias.
Free knowledge.
Bueno, no tengo mucho tiempo porque la verdad es que la idea es que podamos conversar un poco más acerca de estos temas.
In order to be able to have a conversation afterwards. So I'll try to speak slowly for those who are listening in another language. This presentation is about free knowledge and how this functions within the Wikipedia ecosystem, who I represent here in Chile.
Si bien es probable que la mayoría de ustedes conozcan,
the majority of you
utilicen al menos Wikipedia,
use Wikipedia,
del movimiento Wikimedia,
which is the star project of the Wikipedia Foundation. It's always important to know, remember how it functions, and the community of people who are working for a co-creation of knowledge, of free knowledge. Years. Wikipedia is an encyclopedia. It's written by a community of voluntary writers, and it's a free use and collaborative. And it gives access to everybody to the sum of knowledge. There are now more than 300 Wikipedias, one for each language. They have more than 57 million pages of content between articles and annexes. This is a number, obviously, which is going up as I'm talking now. It has almost 300,000 active users who edit or create more than 5 articles per month. And there are at least 200 structures or groups like Wikipedia Chile around the world who promote this project and the sister projects of the Wikipedia Foundation in their different territories. There are other projects which function with the same principles as Wikipedia, but which work with other formats of knowledge. There's Wikidata, for example, which is a database which is free and collaborative. There's also Wikimedia Commons, which is audiovisual content, Wikisource, which has original documents, and other projects which are part of the Wikipedia family. But in the case of Wikipedia specifically, which is the star project of the Foundation, we should point out that it's the 5th most visited site on internet, and just in 2020 it had more than 100 million visits. And how did we manage to do this project? A project that's free and collaborative, that is not profit-oriented, and is centered on knowledge. How did we manage to get it to be the most visited? It's only so there's 3 elements for it to do with its content, so its structure. So Wikipedia is an encyclopedia. It has neutrality. So it promotes the widest possible spread of points of view about any particular point. Everything needs to be connected to a source. That doesn't just mean that you can verify that everything's well quoted, but it also permits the reader to search for more information through these references. But there are other elements which to do with the community behind Wikipedia. Also the principles that Wikipedia promotes, which are governance, transparency, and accessibility. Governance. Wikipedia is a community. It has an organization. It's a self-organization. It's structured by the community itself. So it's an interesting model for governance and very specific to digital. But also the theme of transparency is very important in Wikipedia projects, because all contents that are created are recorded, and this information is never lost. So it permits users to follow the evolution of themes of discussion, of who has participated, how the narratives have been modified, different themes, and how certain themes are activated in specific moments or political or social moments. And lastly, but not least, the theme of open access. So all the information in Wikipedia is free, open. Wikipedia doesn't charge in any way. It doesn't use your data either. It doesn't sell your data. It doesn't charge for participation or using any of the material.
Y aquí está un poco la diferencia esencial con estas otras plataformas que yo mencioné.
Here you can see the main difference between the other platforms like Twitter or Facebook. There are many platforms of socialization or information which are making money from the data of their users. Wikipedia is changing this paradigm and putting freedom of access in the center of the production and circulation of this content. Douglas commented that all this comment has Creative Commons licenses. So to recognize the author, you need to credit the author, but you can use this content for whatever ends you wish. So for the use and reuse of this content, of this information in otros contexts.
Con esta perspectiva, la verdad es que todos nos estamos beneficiando muchísimo.
From this point of view, we're all making the most of this. There's few people don't use Wikipedia today, or one of the Wikipedia projects. But it's not just benefit from the normal person, but it's also benefit for communities of knowledge. Wikipedia articles and their visibility help to visualize and divulge scientific knowledge. Not just because they're references, these articles, because but often the editors compile the information and put it in a more simple language so that the scientific community can meet its commitment to making knowledge circulate in the public sphere. So in the pandemic, Wikipedia was very important to spread information related to COVID-19, and it's been recognized by international organizations like the OMS for the visibility and speed and neutrality and the work of verificability and the capacity to spread this essential information. And so it's really probably has saved lives as well. The article on COVID-19 is in more than 116 languages. It's the most visited article in the history of Wikipedia, in the 20 years history of Wikipedia. What are the obstacles to this work? With this virtuous circle between Wikimedia and free knowledge. Wikipedia is just one part of this mechanism. The main aim is to get other actors to get involved with open access projects and free knowledge, so that together we can go around paywalls which prevent many articles and scientific articles which can be a real source for Wikipedia, because these paywalls limit free
Ayer
access.
conversábamos en otro evento con Pepe Flores,
Yesterday we talked with Pepe Flores, who's an activist in Wikipedia in Mexico, and it was a really interesting analogy. So what use is of making a door to knowledge if you just, when you open it, you just find a brick wall, which are the paywalls of the publications, which prevent us from accessing these sources, these original sources, and learn more about what we're investigating. So I'd like to point out that the work of libraries is being very interesting and very important. So above all, when they're talking about digitalizing collections and to come together with the spreading of open access depositories, all this work is helping to improve the verificability of Wikipedia. This doesn't have just an impact in which one can struggle against disinformation, porque disinformation doesn't have a paywall. But, so, us as a Wikimedia movement and fighting for open knowledge, and this model is not just benefiting science and not just to the users, but it also benefits the creation, citizen creation, access to information, participation, informed debate, and for this reason, better democracy. It seems to me very important that in Chile, the Constituent Assembly is putting the right to information and knowledge in the center of the political discussion through the commission, which coordinates with Cristina. It's a unique opportunity that we need to make the most of. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Patricia, for your presentation. And so it opens the path immediately to chat with Cristina Dorador. She's a member of the Constituent Assembly, and she's a scientist as well.
Hola Carolina, hola Patricia. Hola.
Hello.
Un gusto estar aquí.
So a pleasure to be here.
La invitación.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
Estamos en trabajo constituyente, así que,
as you know, we're working on the Constitution.
Como señala Patricia, la Convención Constitucional tenemos una oportunidad
So the
de hablar
Commission in the Constitution has a historical opportunity to talk about open access to knowledge, because it's the fundamental idea is to democratize information. To increase participation is one of the most important challenges that we have, because this is a guarantee for improvements in society, more open, more solidarity, which prepare us to confront the great challenges as humanity. For example, the climate crisis. Knowledge is not just important to take decisions, but also to understand our changing reality. Now are going through various types of crisis in Chile, where we're questioning economic development models, also the question of migration, the pandemic. All this creates doubt and points of view which are not based on scientific knowledge and on closed minds, and which generates social problems. So for that reason, from the Knowledge Systems Commission, we face the democratization of knowledge, but also access to information. So the right of communication, human right, And another theme is digital rights. We think that they're absolutely totally basic to this new time, in which almost everything is digitalized. And there's also a wide use of our personal information, which also needs to be regulated. Question of privacy and access, and their decisions which are not necessarily under our control. There's a lot of fear as well of the increasing implementation of technology, which can interfere in our proper existence. This is a commission which is thinking about the future, but which is also taking care of the present, and we're really behind in some of the questions, complex questions that we're confronting now. One theme that came out in the earlier conversations was, how do you access knowledge? In the scientific world, we publish. These publications are in big magazines that you need to pay for, and the Chilean system finances these publications. It also finances investigation. So the final product is being financed with public funds to the benefit of some big publishing companies. So it's not open. So it's important to have open platforms, state-run open platforms for knowledge. This is something that we should be talking about in the Constituent Assembly. And it's not just having access to the crude information, the data, but also to democratize. You have to connect with the educational systems. So, for example, how do you make a very technical paper that talks about very important things? How do you get that into the public opinion? How do you get that to the decision makers? And that they include that in. This is not an easy step. You need people who are trained in this, communicators of science, so that professionals of education can have this perspective. Beyond teaching what they know, but making their students think and look for sources of information. So the work of Wikimedia is very important because it maintains this encyclopedia, a lot of data which is created in community, new constitution. So that includes ancestral knowledge. It crosses, some involved, some not, but everything needs to be taken into account when you make decisions. So this idea of epistemological justice and a justice of knowledge, this means that we have a meeting in diversity. So we in the Commission of Knowledge Systems, we to work and present initiatives for open data and accessibility, and also the democratization of knowledge. So it's not just a question of economic level for access, but there's also questions of other inclusive questions, for example, handicapped people. So los libros de audio, audiobooks will also be important to promote. We can't leave out minorities because we haven't adapted and understood certain conditions. This is one of the challenges of diversity. And to end, I would like to mention this goes beyond just being a theme of declaration of ideas. This needs to become real because the circumstances demand it. The climatic crisis is here now, and the decisions need to be taken based on evidence, and there's no place for negationism or doubts. So we think we're really against these spreading of misinformation. And this open access means that we can have proofs, we can have real knowledge and not just misinformation. And so we can have verification of the data, information that is generated in a specific context. This is also very important. But fortunately, mass media often contributes to disinformation. In general, this is what I wanted to mention. We're committed to advancing with this system, and we hope that everyone will participate. When we open the window to public participation, please, you're all invited to come to the convention, to connect, and we'd love to know your points of view. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Christina, for your participation, of your words. Now the idea is that we can chat, the four of us, on the themes that have been mentioned in your presentations. So there, Douglas, Patricia, and Christina. Christina will appear. Perhaps Christina can't participate anymore because she's working in the commission in the Constitution. So we have about 20 minutes to chat.
Ya, entonces de repente te voy a hacer la pregunta a ti primero. ¿Ya? A ver.
So I'm going to make a question.
Del mundo científico, ¿no? Y en este
Christina, you're from the scientific world, and in this seminary, we're talking about knowledge beyond the scientific, about culture, heritage. So what Douglas talked about, but what Patricia also mentioned.
La convención también los aborda en conjunto, porque recordemos que esta convención es de sistemas de conocimiento y culturas, patrimonios, arte. ¿Qué similitudes ves tú entre estos dos mundos y qué vínculos?
What similarities do you see between these two worlds?
Avanzar como Estado hacia una idea de conocimiento.
What tools permit us to advance as a state to an idea much wider of knowledge? This is perhaps one of the important conversations that we're going to have in the Commission these days, to agree to have a base for the conversation in common, concerning what everybody understands by science, heritage, and culture. Because what's interesting in our commission is that we're not all experts in all fields. Yes, there are experiences from different perspectives. This diversity of visions will help us to understand this question. We also need to leave behind such academic definitions, but people need to understand when we talk about culture. We shouldn't impose European, for example, visions about culture development. Here we're talking about decolonization, and it's going to be hard work.
Yo creo que, bueno, mi punto de vista es que está todo relacionado. O sea,
my point of view is that everything's related.
Primero, desarrollar investigación científica sin la historia.
It's impossible to do scientific investigation without history, without a context. The same with art and culture. Everything we do, and everything gets enriched from different tendencies, movements, from different places. Because when you start taking this apart, you find points in common, like these big fractal networks which suddenly form points of connection.
Y no necesariamente insisto en que tenemos que fusionar temas, sino que
we don't have to join the themes together, but rather understand them from different perspectives. So how do we create investigation? There's already investigation of art, but how do we generate investigation from art or from science? How to do science of knowledge, how to understand how we create knowledge. It's very important to understand where we want to head for as a society. Thanks very much, Christina. I imagine there's a lot to talk about in the Commission to find points in common. So there's all this specific points of view. That's going to be in the next few months. You're going to be talking about that. Thank you very much for your response. Now I'd like to ask a question of Douglas. Europeana works with heritage and the use of heritage for a more open and creative society. But despite this, and the same happens with science, the availability of knowledge shocks with a privative culture, and in addition, copyright law is different in different countries. What recommendations could you give us to overcome these blocks?
The overall picture of open access in cultural heritage is still very much a minority sport activity, as I suggested. I think, practically speaking, the simplification, the unification of copyright law, for example, within Europe, which is happening now, but also globally, is important because copyright really is too complex, even for cultural heritage professionals, for example, who I work with. You know, it is a difficult subject to manage and deal with, and particularly when you have thousands or hundreds of thousands of collections, all of which will have different rights and copyrights, which can be complex to investigate. That presents a very big resource challenge. So I would say a fundamental step forward is to use the international standardized available legal tools. So I mentioned the Creative Commons licenses. We also have things like the public domain mark. The more the institutions use those, yes, they are machine readable, so that's incredibly important, but also human readable, that they have a brand recognition where a general citizen can see them attached to an artwork or a photograph or a manuscript online and have a much better chance of understanding what they can do with them than if, as I often see in my research, there is a link to a museum terms and conditions page, which can be hundreds, sometimes thousands of words long. So standardized legal tools are very important. As cultural heritage institutions, we need to be making the life of users and to communicate the opportunity to reuse collections and objects as simple as possible. So the communication challenge is very, very real. And what we see at the moment, which was very much connected with my colleagues' comments about scientific publishing, we see exactly the same difficulties in, for example, art history and academic publishing, where it is far too expensive for universities, academics, authors to reuse and publish often photographs and images of work which are genuinely in the public domain, because the institutions that have them are still asserting copyright and using copyright to control and to attempt to monetize access.
Muchas gracias, Douglas, por tu respuesta. Efectivamente, claro.
Thank you very much, Douglas, for your response.
Es difícil para nosotros como académicos.
It's often difficult for us as academics to access not just to information, but also documents like photos. And I think this is something which would be much easier if there could be an international standard. Now I'd like to ask something from Patricia. You talked about barriers to access in an investigation. So above all, through the paywalls and magazines, publications that are commercial. So the access to different areas of knowledge, it's very important to be able to access this. Above all, important during the pandemic. This often, above all in certain areas of investigation, for example in natural science or in mathematics sciences, not so much in humanities or in art. We in the situation of these barriers, these pay barriers, these paywalls, which stop us getting to knowledge. How could university authorities promote open access to knowledge in the world of investigation, scientific investigation?
Más que pensar quizás lo que podrían empezar a hacer, porque yo sé que es un tema bien
Look at
difícil,
what
es quizás
start
lo que
doing.
habría que empezar a cuestionar
It's a difficult thing.
al día de hoy.
I mean,
Y hay algo
it's
que
just
tiene que ver
being
con los
questioned,
incentivos, finalmente.
and we need to
Algunos
incentivize.
investigadores chilenos tienen
Now,
pocos incentivos
Chilean
para
investigators
ocupar
have
su
very few
valioso
incentives
tiempo en
to
investigar y
pass,
publicar
to
en
pass
abierto.
their
Por
important
el
time
contrario, uno de los criterios
publishing
fundamentales
openly.
para poder adjudicarse
On the
fondos
contrary,
del Estado
one of
como
the
investigador,
criteria
que es,
for
entre
having
paréntesis, el mayor financista,
support from the
porque las
state,
universidades tienen cada
which
vez,
is an
sobre todo las públicas,
incentive
cada
for
vez menos
financing,
recursos para financiar esas
because public universities have
uno de los
less
mayores criterios en
resources.
la
One
revisión
of the
del
most
perfil de
important
los
criteria in
investigadores
the revision
es
of
que
the
tenga
profile of the
publicaciones
investigator is that they have
libros de
publications
aprendizaje o
in
son
specific
todos libros de
magazines,
pago.
which are
Por
all
lo tanto,
paid magazines.
ahí ya hay
So there is,
muy bajo incentivo o un
there's a
contraincentivo
very
para
little
que
incentive
investigadores
or even a
publiquen
contra-incentive
sus investigaciones y
for
los resultados de su
publication in.
trabajo en revistas de acceso abierto, por ejemplo. Entonces ahí tenemos un círculo un
So there we
poco
have
negativo que se está
a negative
produciendo.
circle or vicious circle which is
También
being
quizás ahí,
produced.
bueno, hay temas de los imaginarios también. Hay
But there's also questions of imaginations. There's certain ideas which suggest that free access or freedom, they're not so high quality. That if you pay, then it has a standard. It has come a basic standard of quality. This model of thought is something that we need to struggle against as the Wikimedia movement. The free, the collaborative, what has been written, although you don't have a diploma.
Claro, como certificados de validación, por así decirlo, que son los títulos universitarios, todo eso también puede tener un valor.
So the non-university can also have a value. So these are often criticisms of Wikipedia, but actually we think it's an advantage. This is very powerful in the scientific world. It also takes place in the world of heritage. We've often had this problem with these barriers, working with the institutions themselves, those who take care of the heritage in Chile. When we propose projects of digitalization, and after all, these works are already in the public domain due to time, but these institutions don't accept liberating or rather facilitating the access to this, and they don't comply with the role which they have been given to facilitate the access of the citizens to our cultural heritage, which belongs to us all. One of the institutions that Douglas mentioned, which promotes certain politics for public access in Chile, today they're charging for you to access certain patron heritage which belongs to everybody. It may be because the institutions have very few resources. They try to monetize and give an economic value, but we have to see where does this perspective come from. It's difficult. It needs to work with other types of incentive, other motivations to join this movement. And so perhaps there's a question for both of you. Perhaps with those documents, books, and other types of material which are not in public domain,
digamos que se pierden en estos depósitos.
And get lost in these deposits.
Yo tengo un caso muy personal.
A very personal case. I'm looking for a book, and the author has no inheritors, but I can't get at this book because it's protected by copyright. And there's only 3 books, 2 of them were lost, and so there's only 1 left. In science and investigation in general, alternatives have been developed, like the preprint? What can we do for other types of cultural production, which are in some way enclosed because they haven't been passed to public domain and we can't get it? And that's for the copyright laws, due to copyright laws. Who would like to respond? Douglas?
Thank you. Absolutely, there are very real and known negative effects of what you described. For example, we often talk about the 20th century black hole. So this is a huge amount of 20th century culture, audiovisual, still photographs, much, much more, which hasn't been digitized because the institutions don't spend their limited resources on digitizing it because they know that they cannot simply publish it. So that's a very kind of logical decision process. However, one of the solutions there is that we need much better legal exceptions in national law that says cultural institutions are special. They are memory institutions. Their job is about promoting public knowledge, sharing collections. Therefore, they should be treated differently than, say, perhaps a broadcaster or a commercial publisher. They need to have exceptions that enable them to, yes, digitize, but also publish this content online, even if it is still in copyright. If it's deposited within the institution, they need a legal exception. So there is a legal, there's legal work there that needs to be done. And for example, in Europe, the current copyright directive in the single market, which is being implemented across the member states at the moment, introduces a new exception for cultural institutions to digitize in copyright and what we call orphan works, so the copyright is uncertain, for preservation purposes. So that's one example of a positive step.
Gracias, Douglas. Patricia, ¿quisieras agregar algo?
Sí,
So,
yo
Patricia,
tengo
would
un
you like to add
ejemplo que tiene
anything?
más que ver con la mediación, porque Douglas habló sobre algo que tiene que ver con las excepciones a las leyes, que es súper
So
interesante.
Douglas spoke about exceptions to
Pero el
the
ejemplo
laws.
que tengo, o lo que
Very
se me ocurre en
interesting,
este
but the
contexto,
example
tiene que ver
which
más que ver
maybe think
con la
about
mediación y con el trabajo de
is to
poder
do with mediation.
buscar alternativas intermedias.
The
Yo
work
quiero
looking for
destacar mucho la clase de
intermediary
memoria chilena,
alternatives.
que
I'd
es
like to point out what
el portal
Memoria
de
Chile,
digitalización
Chilena
y de
do.
difusión
They
de
have a whole
patrimonio, de
work on
contextualización de
digitalization
acervos patrimoniales
and
que tiene la
communication
Biblioteca
of
Nacional de
heritage
Chile, que por
in the
ejemplo
National Library of Chile.
ellas han digitalizado y compartido y
digitalized
contextualizado, que el trabajo de
and put in
mediación es súper
context,
importante en
because the work of mediation is very
rubro.
important in this sense.
Contenido que todavía está protegido
Contents
por derechos
which
de
is
autor, por la
still
legislación
under
temporal,
copyright
todavía
law,
está protegido, pero que lo han compartido
for which they have
explicando que
shared,
esto puede ser
explaining
consultado, revisado, pero todavía no está en dominio público, todavía no pertenece al dominio común. Por lo tanto, puede utilizarse con ciertas limitaciones, con ciertas excepciones o en ciertos contextos muy particulares. Entonces es una especie de espacio común, intermedio, entendiendo que hay limitaciones todavía para libre uso, pero que si bien esta obra o este conjunto de obras o estas fotografías tienen valor, para mucha gente, sobre todo en los contextos educativos, sí los puede al menos consultar y utilizar en ese sentido. Entonces, no es lo ideal, pero sí es súper interesante el que es identificando esas piezas y poniendo a disposición al menos también el contexto de esas piezas para que los investigadores, por ejemplo, las puedan ver.
So that investigators can see them, can consult them.
Que ha hecho Memoria Chilena es
Work that Memoria Chilena have done is incredible. And it's been recognized not just in Chile, but on a global level in terms of access to the cultural heritage. So there's 4 minutes left, and I'd like to ask you both.
Si tuvieran que entregar una sola buena razón para abrir el acceso al conocimiento.
If you had to just give us one good reason for opening up knowledge, what would it be? Douglas, you can start.
Thank you. As an institution, it's in your interests. Read the mission statement of every cultural heritage institution. You usually see a remix of the same 300 or 400 words about sharing knowledge, educating, improving society. So open access directly supports and drives. It creates a lot of value from things that you are spending, investment that you've made already. It's in your evaluation. it's in your interest as your institution, but also for your city, your neighbors, your region, your country, and internationally. It connects your collections to this global conversation that we spoke about today with, for example, with Wikimedia. So it's a win-win. We need to move forward, continue. Let's keep going.
Thank you, Douglas. Patricia.
Me sumo a lo que dice Douglas, es la misión.
So I agree with what Douglas said.
Por lo tanto,
that is the mission of
obligación, pero al mismo tiempo
so
es porque es un derecho. Porque es un derecho humano también tener acceso, en este caso,
to have access to culture, to information, to science.
A la información de interés público y que además no olvidar
Information of public interest.
Y de producción científica hoy en día está siendo financiada con recursos públicos.
And let's not forget that culture and a lot of scientific investigation is being financed with funds. So it's our right to have access to this information, and that the institutions should make that easy, should give us the possibility to exercise this right. So I think that the discussion around the Constitution that Christina pointed out is very important. Because it's also to do with that's how we imagine a society, including the right to information. So there's a great task in front of us, especially the Commission of Systems of Knowledge in the Commission for the Constitution, to guarantee this human right. And it's not just on paper, but really is made accessible through public policy. So we're now going to close this panel. So I'd like to thank Douglas, Patricia, and Christina for their presentations, or point out so many important questions that we need to continue talking about and that we need to put in the public domain to talk about. So thank you for your interventions, and let's carry on in this seminary.
Bueno, muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much
Panelistas y por supuesto
to our panelists
por haber
and to Carolina
esta interesante conversación.
to have led this interesting conversation.
A continuación, quiero invitarles a que revisemos el siguiente video.
So I'd like to invite you to see the next visit, the next video, which is the presidential candidate Marco Enriquez Ominami, and that will be followed by a video by Gabriel Boric, who is another presidential candidate. So here we go, Marco Enriquez Ominami. What is your vision about the role of knowledge, science, and technology for the development of the country? Chile has international credibility. Chile could, making the most of international prices, to go into debt as a state, so that we can increase the budget for scientific investigation as countries that manage to deal with the short term through extractivism, but also with a vision more long term based on knowledge. Chile needs to make an important economic effort, both from the state and the private sector. So as president of Chile, I would propose to leave this extractivist logic. The future is in green technologies. The imagination of technology needs to be encouraged. To thinking about encouraging a true public policy. The only limits on Chile would be the imagination. Science and technology are the path to leave behind the extractivist. Basically, we take copper out, we wash it, and we send it abroad. So in the next years, we need to reach 2%. dedicated to research and investigation. So we also need to have a system where results are shared between scientific community. So the different worlds and contexts all need to share their experiences and create dynamics that together we can make the most of the different timescales, short, medium, and long term. We need to think about the different responses to this time. So that this logic, through science and technology, we can leave this Chilean logic of extractivism. So we need to create collaboration. And it's in a state which puts resources and also encourages the private sector to multiply 3, 4, 5 times this investment in technology. What is your vision about the role of knowledge, science, and technology for the development of the country?
¿Cuál creemos que debe ser el rol del conocimiento que se financia con fondos públicos para el desarrollo del país?
What the role of knowledge that is financed with public money for the future of the country? So talking with the scientific community, there's mainly 3 objectives. One, to think about reality from a critical point of view of the world in which we live. Secondly, it should be a contribution to the well-being of society. And thirdly, this knowledge should be a contribution to public policy. And it's very important to think about the local optic, and that's why it's so important to decentralize to the regions and not concentrate in a couple of universities. Networks should be much more collaborative rather than competitive. So we want to strengthen the regional centers for investigation and development. It's very important also to create an academic career to give work stability to investigators. They are now very precarious. It's important to look for initiatives which enable us to meet the requirements of UNESCO around innovation and knowledge. I think it's very important to have a policy of open access to scientific knowledge, which has been financed through public funds. There's a great challenge for investigation if we want to be a government which works with scientific knowledge and not just impressions. We'd like to reach 1% of the global domestic product invested in investigation, and thinking that it should always be growing so that we can insert ourselves into the global chains of production of knowledge, so that we can have technological transfers and improving local knowledge. So we need to grow this sector and give it a gender perspective, which it hasn't been present in the public policies of the country, and this is transversal to all our program. We think it's very important to connect science, technology, and innovation to the different sectors of society, like little small businesses or universities. Universities today have impact. This should be deepened through our government. So we need to trust science.
Bueno, regresamos ya para dar
So here we are back again.
segundo panel de esta mañana.
Now we're going to have our second panel,
De la ciencia y el acceso
which is
abierto
called The Implementation of
Reino
Open
Unido
Science and
y
Open
Chile.
Access in France,
Este
United
panel
Kingdom, and
será
Chile.
moderado por Karen Jara.
This panel will be moderated by
Ella es
Karen Jara.
antropóloga y licenciada en
She's an
Ciencias de la
ethnologue,
Documentación por la
and she's
Universidad de Bahía Ancha
graduated
de Educación.
in science, documentation
Posee un
science.
magíster en educación, mención
She's
adjunta
also got a
en
master's in
por la
education
Universidad Autónoma de Chile y es diplomada en
in
gestión
the
educativa
university,
y formación
and she
pedagógica
has
universitaria por la Universidad Santo Tomás.
she also has a
Posee
degree
una vasta
in
experiencia
university pedagogy.
superior
She has an enormous experience in
bibliotecas de la Universidad
libraries for superior education.
Actualmente preside la Comisión Permanente Asesora
She's
de Bibliotecas y
now in
Documentación
charge of
del
the
Consejo de Rectores
Permanent
de las
Committee
Universidades
for
Chilenas
Accessory
y es directora del sistema de
of the
bibliotecas de la
library
Universidad
system,
de
and she's
Concepción,
director
donde
of
se han
the
implementado
library
reformas
system
y
of the
refuerzos de
University
código
of
abierto de
Constitution.
apoyo a la investigación y a la
So
docencia.
she's supporting
Además, ha liderado
investigation and teaching.
procesos de gestión, certificación,
She has also developed
calidad
processes
9001,
of management,
autoevaluación
ISO
y acreditación, y también
2001,
ha administrado y ejecutado proyectos institucionales
and she's
de
also
mejoramiento para
been in
muchos
charge of
procesos
institutional
bibliotecarios en apoyo
projects
a la enseñanza,
for
el
improving
aprendizaje y la investigación.
access to
Hoy
data.
es parte de proyectos relacionados con edición electrónica y patrimonio cultural universitario. Karen,
So she's now.
muchísimas gracias por acompañarnos. Muy bienvenida.
Thank you, Karen, for being here.
Buenos días, un agrado estar con ustedes. Y
Pues it's very nice to be here with you all,
poder moderar
and a privilege to be able to moderate this panel.
Y para
So we'll
dar
have really
inicio
interesting
a lo que
guests.
todos hemos
So
estado
to start with,
esperando, voy a presentarles y darles una pequeña introducción respecto a quienes
I'm going to introduce each of our
En primer lugar, va a
guests.
acompañar
So first of all,
Sweeney, quien es
David Sweeney,
ejecutivo de Research England de
Executive
UK
Director of
and
Research England of
Research and Innovation, quien después
UK
de
Research
estudiar
and Innovation.
estadística en la Universidad de
After
Abierto,
studying
allí
statistics,
trabajó en BBSRC como consultor
he worked in
estadístico,
BBSRC
además
as a
fue director
statistics
de Royal
consultant.
Holloway,
He
Universidad
was
de
also director of Royal Holloway
y
University
vicepresidente.
and became
Como
vice
director
president.
de HEFCE, lideró
As
el
director of
desarrollo y
HSFE,
implementación del marco de
he was in
excelencia en
charge of the
investigación. Fue además
implementing of
responsable
the
de la
context
política y
of
financiamiento
excellence
de la
in
investigación,
investigation,
el intercambio de conocimientos y las relaciones
exchange of
con
knowledge,
empresas.
and
En mayo
the
de
relations between
2017 fue
universities
nombrado
and
el primer
companies.
presidente ejecutivo de Research
He became the first
uno de los
executive
9 consejos
director
de investigación que forman
of Research
UKRI,
England,
que es el mayor
of
financiador
organizations
de investigación en el Reino
involved in
Unido. Es
financing
responsable de las
investigation in the UK.
subvenciones en bloque de la universidad para la investigación y el intercambio de conocimientos. También tendremos el privilegio de que nos
We also have the
acompañe
privilege
Marian Dacos,
of Marian Dacos being with us.
en el Ministerio de Educación
She is
Superior, Investigación e
National
Innovación de
Coordinator
Francia.
of Innovation in
Marian
France.
Dacos es coordinador
Marian Dacos
de Ciencia Abierta,
is National Coordinator for Open Science for the Ministry of Education.
de Francia. Ha estado muy involucrado en el
She's been very involved
de los dos planes de ciencia abierta
in the
de
process
Francia,
of elaboration of the
y
2 projects for
2021.
investigation in 2018 and
Está
2020.
además profundamente involucrado en las actividades
She's
de
also
Comité de
deeply
Ciencia
involved
Abierta de
in the activities of the Committee of Open Science of France.
Open Edition.
She was a director, founder of Open Edition, an academic structure dedicated to open publication in humanities and social scientists. It was created in 1999 with more than 250 magazines, 11,000 books, and Open Edition is seen as one of the most important European initiatives. She recently received the prestigious Medal for Innovation in 2016 and 2 Google fellowships. She's written many articles and 2 books about science, open science. And our last guest, is from our country, Chile, Patricia Muñoz, Subdirector of the ANID, which is the National Agency for Investigation and Development. She's in charge of, she's a librarian. She's a specialist in the management of technological and scientific information. She's been in charge of projects related to accessibility and visibilization of scientific activities. Her results, her main lines of investigation are access to scientific knowledge, monitoring scientific production, and scientific policies. She has a huge experience in the design of surfaces of information and tools for the management of technological and scientific investigation. She's part of various international networks and committees. She's founder member of a network of open repositories of science. She represented Latin America in the International Commission of Oceans from the UNESCO. She represented Chile and was Latin American coordinator of ocean science publications for Latin America. As you can see, our three guests today have an enormous experience in the themes we're going to be treating today. So I'll be asking each of them to make a presentation of 10 minutes long, and then we'll get a conversation. So here, I'll leave David with.
Good afternoon from the United Kingdom, and good morning in Chile. It's a pleasure and a privilege to be with you. I was first interested in open access and open science when I was responsible for university library 25 years ago now. And I want to pay tribute to the work of librarians I have worked with over the full 25 years. If you want to get something done, you get the librarians to work with you. I am incredibly impressed with what's been achieved. So what is happening in the United Kingdom? Let me try and share my screen with you and check that that is working. I'm hoping that you can see that picture, open science in the UK. I can see it on my Zoom, so I know it is there. We have been interested in UK, in our big research organisation in the UK, in open access for a long time, but particularly since 2012. We have been determined to present all of the publications funded from our grants available in open access form. And we do not mind which route is taken to open access. To use the general expressions, we don't mind if it's gold, we don't mind if it's green. But we are committed to bearing our share of the cost of making material open. And since around 2013, we have committed about 1% of our research budget to make our material open. Our universities pay more than that, but our universities have their own funds for open access and indeed for scholarly publishing. Our contribution, 1%, I think is sufficient to ensure that we moved from a paywalled environment to an open access environment. How are we doing it? Well, actually, very simply. We're just telling all our grantees, having worked up to this over the last 7 years, we are telling them that if they accept our grant, then it is a responsibility of them and their university or their research organisation to make the material freely available through one of the routes that are open from publishers. And indeed, if publishers will not permit the material to be open, then we'd ask them to choose a different route to publication. We want a single and simple policy that is clear and really leaves no doubts. We just want our research outputs to be more accessible for the benefit of research, society, and indeed the economy. Our contribution of 1%, we think, builds what we would call a sustainable model for open access. There are many publishers who think that with reasonable charges and our contribution, the costs of making the material freely available to readers is justified. We also think that now that the costs are driven principally by the costs of peer review and the publishing process rather than by reading, it's fair and reasonable for funders to contribute to the costs of making their material easy to read. We are also, in addition to making funded open access available, looking at new models of publishing, helping to fund new developments which will provide different routes for authors to publish the material. And of course, in the UK, we work closely with the European Commission and with a group of other funders called Coalition S in order to present very similar policies to our authors. That is important to us because we have many UK authors who publish with Wellcome and with the Gates Foundation, and it's important that they have similar policies. We have just announced our policy. It will be implemented from next January, and really the authors and the research community and the librarians have been very happy with the proposals. Our publishers are, I think, nervous that it will be more difficult for them. Of course, they are nervous that they won't make the same level of profit, but we really are interested in our material being freely available to read. Open access is only one, though, of the three lines that we are pursuing towards open science. We are also pursuing open research data and a whole range of what we would call open culture methods to encourage our authors to support them in the work they do in being open and transparent. We have worked for quite a long time on open research data, notably working with the FAIR data principles, which you see on this slide, and also with the open research data policies that the European Commission are implementing in Horizon 2020. To do that, we have investments in data infrastructure and stewardship across a number of our disciplines. We recognize that whereas open access is a relatively simple thing to implement, open data is very complex and very different in disciplinary research groups. We are looking to fund centers of expertise and skills in doing this. And at the heart of what we do is a requirement that our grant proposals should describe data management plans when they apply for money so that we can help them in finding ways to make their research data as open as is possible. But we also recognize as closed as necessary because there are issues around the trusted nature of research and around research data participants. That means you can't just make all of your data open, and you've got to look at ethical issues and security issues. So we are funding work on data management, curating that data, looking at repositories, catalogues, national disciplinary data centers, and particular centers of expertise in software sustainability as we look to open methods for analyzing data, and our data institute, the Turing Institute. We are, of course, part of many networks, including the distributed life sciences research infrastructure, and that has worked hard, as you would expect, on data during the pandemic and in making the research data that are relevant to COVID freely available. Now, this is happening all over the world, but as one of those countries that has led with others the work on vaccines and has also done a lot of trials, as many other countries have, we're very keen that research data should be freely available. And the lessons we have learned from the pandemic can be helpful for the future. Lastly, I'd just mention responsible research assessment. At the heart of what we do is assessing the quality of research and ensuring that we reward those who are open, transparent, and produce excellent results. To do that, we think you've got to take many factors into account. Just looking at simple metrics of research performance, we think, is inadequate. Just indeed looking at research publications and not looking at the broader contribution that researchers make to science and research, as for example in our resume, our curriculum vitae, our job summary of what researchers have done, we think that is important. And we're working with the Global Research Council and also with UNESCO and OECD and others to ensure that we support particularly our young researchers, and also that we support access to research and support researchers all over the world. That is what we're doing in the UK. We're part, I think, of a global network of work that's going on. I'm delighted to be here with Maren and Patricia. I think we have to work together across the world in order to implement open science for the benefit of all. Thanks very much.
Thank you, David. A continuación nos acompañará
So now we'll be with Marine Dacos from France, who's going to give us a presentation of 10 minutes.
Happy to be there. Sorry for not speaking in Spanish. I have learned English and Italian at school, so I cannot speak in Spanish today, unfortunately. So I'm here to present the French Open Science Policy, and I'm in charge of this kind of policy at the Ministry of Research. So we launched in July 2018. Sorry, there is a mistake. In 2018, the first National Open Science Plan with 3 commitments announced by Frédérique Vidal, the Minister for Higher Education, Research and Innovation herself. So the first commitment was about open access to publication, mandating open access for all research granted by national agencies. The second commitment about research data that we wanted to be open access or at least fair access. And then a third commitment to be part of a changing structure. So we created a governance, what we call the Open Science Committee, with different layers. The first one is the Open Science Steering Committee, very high-level people that make decisions at the national level. Then an Open Science Executive Committee, doing coordination at national level with major stakeholders, and diverse working groups we will provide expertise on specific and technical questions, because open science, as you already know, is a bit technical. The impact of this plan is an impressive upgrade of open access. So we started in 2018 with 41% of open access in France. The year later, we reached 49%. And the year later, we reached 56%, and we will publish new information about this in some weeks. Now we have decided to launch a second French plan for open science, again announced by Frédérique Vidal, and this plan decided to triple the open science budget, moving from 5 million a year to 15 million a year, and to be integrated into the European and the international landscape, especially in the context of the French presidency of the European Union. And we also decided that we needed to adapt the open science policies on different thematic and disciplinary levels because of course, we cannot considers that data coming from archaeology and data coming from health research could be handled with the same way. So the first pass of this new plan is about generalizing open access to publication. So again, in the first plan, we decided to make a mandate for all publicly funded research. Then to support open access economic publishing model that do not require the payment of article and book processing charges. So that means a diamond model. And that doesn't mean that we don't support any other model, but we want to focus on this kind of model. And the third decision was to encourage multilingualism and to create a platform for translating from French to English and from English to French and from French to Spanish, the publications of the French researchers. So our goal is to reach 100% of open access publications in a decade. And we want to support bibliodiversity. So this concept is coming from Latin America, bibliodiversity. That means that we want to reduce the concentration of the publishing ecosystem. The path 2 is about structuring, sharing, and opening up the research data. So we decided to implement an obligation to disseminate publicly funded research data. Of course, it depends on the quality of data, but there is a law in France since 2016 that makes all public data mandatory to be open. We also have decided to create next year Recherche Datagouv, Research Datagouv, which will be the federated national platform for research data. And the sixth one is about promoting data policies in the universities. So the path 3, which is a bit new, is about source code and software, because we need to recognize and support the dissemination of software and code written by researchers. And we want to highlight the production of source code from higher education, research, and innovation, and to define and promote an open source software policy. So it's an important layer of reproducibility to have the source code of the software open. And then the fourth path is the most important one. It's about transforming the practices to make open science the default principle. So it means that we want to develop and value open science skills through every stages of the career of researchers and even students, to value open science and the diversity of scientific productions in the assessment of researchers, of project research, and of universities and research performing organizations, and to, as I already said, to triple the budget for open science. So what we need now is to transform the assessment system to foster long-term open science practices. So as a conclusion, I want to invite you in Paris, because under the French presidency of the European Council, in early 2022, we will organize the Paris Open Science European Conference that will deal, of course, about health research and about evaluation, research assessment questions. So if you can come to Paris in 4th and 5th of February, or if you can attend to the conference, European conference online, then you are welcome. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, Marín.
Thank you very much.
Y por supuesto,
Marín.
vamos a tomar la invitación y estaremos en París el 2022.
Of course, we'll
Será un gran sacrificio
in
por parte
Paris
nuestra
in
ir para
2022.
a esta
Give her the invitation.
A continuación, para continuar con nuestros panelistas, vamos a dejar a Patricia Muñoz.
So now we're going to invite Patricia Muñoz to make her. I'm going to share my screen.
Aquí sí. Bueno, buenos días a todas.
So, hello everybody.
Estoy muy contenta de participar en este panel.
Very happy to be here.
Voy a contar en breves minutos, como dijo Karen,
Today,
qué es lo que
I'm
estamos
going
haciendo en
to
Chile o en qué hemos estado trabajando a propósito
tell
de
you about what we're doing in Chile about
información científica, datos
free
científicos y
access
cómo logramos
to scientific knowledge
alcanzar lo que es el estándar de ciencia abierta. En este
and how
contexto, a
we
los
intend
principios,
trying to reach
reconocemos lo que
the
tenemos
standards of
como
open
tal.
science. So let's recognize what we have.
En ese intertanto tenemos un ecosistema de información científica
So we have
que
a,
lleva
ecosystem
bastante tiempo
of
funcionando
scientific investigation, which
el
has
acceso
been
pagado
functioning for some time,
a las publicaciones que ya se habló en el primer
which
panel.
means that there's access to
Acceso
publications.
abierto que nacen de facto a nivel iberoamericano al principio, como es Cielo.
There's also some principles like Cielo, which was born in Latin America. It's also in Chile.
Para seguir funcionando de
We are working
en cuanto al repositorio,
this way.
también
And so as far as repositories, there's another important initiative for open knowledge. It's the first to work on open access.
Como para lograr al final tener ese acceso sin restricciones de uso.
So that there will be no restrictions on use of publicly financed research. How should we continue working? How can we reach open science? There are some guiding principles which we'd like to share. Instruments that we need to create or manage. And also the culture. How to do this work with everybody in this process. That's the axis of participation, the strength of the system, everything that it's working with instruments for habilitating institutions that there will be open access policy in the future, and above the work articulation in network with all the sectors involved. In this context, first of all, the creation
y también pensando que la política de acceso podría ser un paraguas
that we think that the policy for access could be like an umbrella to generate these instruments and initiatives which permit a bubble to give profits to society and give access to publicly funded scientific research. So the main challenge is to generate an open system for publications and for information and scientific data, which should contribute to the cultural and scientific development of Chile. In this context, we've worked on a policy for access, which has three axes: strengthen access, put some minimum standards for transparency and traceability, which is necessary for public financing. So how to make these results that have been financed more visible. In this context, the policy in on two axes. One is access to scientific publication, and the other is access to scientific data. So questions of infrastructure to be able to meet these requirements, that information can be adequately made available to everybody. In this book, which we started last year, presented this policy with these main axes: access to scientific publications and data. So we've made a kind of green path to access to regional and national deposits. There's been a public consultant challenges of thought about, and some of the political agreements which have been made, which to continue working. So strengthening local and institutional capacities, we've created an instrument which yesterday was agreed on by the state. And this instrument wants to generate capacities in national universities to generate a cultural change about access and open science, to appropriate policy for scientific accessibility with the necessary condition that these are financed by public funds. And the things we're very proud of, which is to do with the articulation of the system, the coordination of the system, which gives us a sustainability in time, is that we've created a national infrastructure for open access. Last week, we signed an agreement of cooperation with public and private universities, as well as the National Agency for Research and Development, as well as the Committee for Libraries of the University, to create this national structure for open access, which enable us to think about together in a changing culture, and also to generate together services, infrastructure, and to create national infrastructure and a way access, getting access to scientific knowledge, and above those which are generated with public funds. This process, we've been working through a participative process since 2020. Is to create technical teams so as to be able to consolidate this first proposal, which was then submitted to public vote. So all this long process has finally produced this infrastructure and instruments which can strengthen local capacities for access to scientific knowledge. The International Seminary is one of our ideas. This process is part of this creation of culture of access amongst the citizens. And the theme should be thought about on a more wider level in terms of the future. In March 2022, we want to consolidate the national infrastructure, having at least one service for access to scientific research agreed on between all the institutions, so that we can have a greater accessibility to all researchers of our country. And this process, the infrastructure is not stopping. It's really is following the plans that we devised. As far as actions for open science, these are like challenges. There's a decision that was taken together to develop human capital for researchers, professionals of technology connected to all these processes of generation of knowledge. This is very important. And this is a theme we're looking at to see how to advance. We should be supporting national magazines that are access. We need to improve their visibility, and that they have instruments to give them sustainability in time, to magazines that are very important for our territory, for some of the disciplines like social studies and art. Another challenge is to revise the models of evaluation for the projects with incentives that encourage open publication or open practices, to produce an incentive so that researchers can be part of this process of change, of access to open science, promote infrastructure and support for open access through already existing platforms. Of course, the reference is the Latin American Network of Digital Deposits, as well as Cielo. These are platforms which mean we can move faster and accelerate process of development of infrastructure for access to open science. It's also very important to progress in a cultural change, accompanying the technological change. Incentives to scientific publications is one of the most complex areas that will explicit public policies which encourage open access as a very important part of our development. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Patricia. Very interesting challenge, the challenges that our country has in front of it. So now our presenters need to concentrate on the questions that are arising. So first of all, we're going to ask David, is there a contradiction between open science and intellectual property? Often perceived as opposite. How is it possible in the practice to find a balance between open science and respect intellectual property as a tool for the transferency of knowledge?
Well, that's very much a question I'm interested in, because another part of my job is working with universities on respecting their intellectual property. Very, very important to me. And also, we've been fairly successful in the UK in exploiting intellectual property and commercializing our research. And it's certainly part of the government's plan to do more of that. But it's equally a commitment of our government to support open access. I think the answer is that the material that we're interested in publishing is mostly underpinning ideas rather than the exploitation of those ideas that leads to commercial outcomes. I think most of the material that's published in standard scholarly journals is published at a point where it can't be readily exploited, where you're expressing the ideas rather than the implementation of those ideas. And actually, that's pretty much irrelevant to open access, in that you can hardly protect intellectual property behind a paywall that costs you maybe $50 to breach by buying access to any individual article. So I think it's not about open access. It's about what is actually reported in the scholarly journals and ensuring that that's at a level of idea that can't be readily exploited. I've been asked this question in a number of different countries, including the United States, but I've never actually seen a live example where early publication has resulted in an inability, not being able to exploit intellectual property. I'm sure it's happened, but it's not a big problem for me, and I don't think open access makes it any more difficult.
Gracias, David. Bueno, creo que
Thank you, David.
Respondido a la inquietud que tenemos fundamentalmente en Chile. Yo lo resumiría en lo que mencionaste. Publicar,
and I would resume by saying publish and share. Complex terms, but we need to talk and work towards these aims. And although this model has been very successful in the United Kingdom, now, the world, the funds of research depend on our capacity to measure the impact of what we're doing. In some way measured through the publications, but we know it's very difficult to measure knowledge. So in France, how do we confront this challenge? How do you measure the impact of open science?
Thank you for a difficult question. I understand that you want to pose difficult question to your guests. It's nice. I would say that your question is about the impact, the measuring of the impact of open science, not of the impact of science itself. Am I correct? So if we are dealing about the impact of open science, it's less difficult than about the impact of science itself. Because we can have, first we can have metrics about the percentage of open access of publications. Then we will have a percentage, some ideas in next year of how we share data and how we do not share. It's very technically, very difficult. But what we will do at the end of the next year is to try to see if we have an impact on usage for publications and for research data. So we run a research by now about how to detect usages coming from the private sector, usage coming from Wikipedian contributors, with usages coming from what we call altmetrics, meaning the networks and so on. So we try to see the different output and outcomes of usages of what we try to share. We don't know yet how much it will be, but we have some first results showing that, for example, in humanities and social sciences, a bank like Crédit Mutuel, a plane company like Airbus and Dassault use a lot the platform Open Edition that I have created. So now we can demonstrate that. That doesn't change the fact that we don't know at the end how useful it will be. But we know that there is usages and we can test it and measure it.
Muchas gracias, Marín. Bueno, definitivamente comparto contigo. Me alegro en esta ocasión de ser moderadora y no ser la invitada a responder las preguntas que estamos haciendo hoy.
I'm glad to be a moderator and not have to respond to the questions we're making today. They're very difficult. And thank you for your generosity in sharing points of view and your knowledge and experience.
Ahora, Patricia.
Now, Patricia.
No por ser de la casa va a ser más fácil.
No, it's not going to be easier just because you're
para ti en esta ocasión. Y bueno, dice
the question for you,
esperamos. ¿De qué forma la política de acceso abierto que hoy la NID nos presenta se conecta con iniciativas internacionales o puede contribuir o no puede
international
a la internacionalización de la ciencia chilena, lo cual nos convoca fundamentalmente como país hoy?
To the internationalization of Chile.
Gracias por la pregunta, claro, y tampoco es tan fácil de responder.
It's not easy to respond.
Yo creo que todo proceso de visibilidad y de acceso
any process of visibilization and access to knowledge
totalmente a la visibilidad de la ciencia y por lo tanto de los investigadores y de
strengthens the visibilization of science and research.
La internacionalización de la ciencia en particular, yo creo.
The internationalization of science is very connected to the question of access, to the possibility of access. This process, I think these policies can help visibility of national risk. It's very high impact levels which would appear in the system. There's another thing which is important, which is the appropriation of scientific knowledge in different sectors of society. So, for example, in the first panel, this question was seen as very important. So it's an opportunity, the internationalization. And concretely with the policy, it's very relevant because of the Ibero-American structures of information, and also on a global level. When we're working with these standards, we're improving the possibilities of access. And so we're working with Open Area, we're working with Africa and different international organisms. So this internationalization comes through standards, and the policy can motivate or accelerate this process. Thank you very much, Karen. Thank you, Patricia. An interesting reply. And the appropriation of scientific knowledge is the key. So thank you to you all for your generosity in sharing your knowledge. Thank you to you as well, Karen, for having moderated this interesting panel. So now we're going to see a video.
Constantes cambios globales que requieren de nuestro compromiso, colaboración y empatía, y de aportar con nuevas formas de trabajo para enfrentar los desafíos actuales y futuros. En este contexto, el conocimiento es esencial. Y aquel que se financia con fondos públicos debe ser un bien público, abierto para todas y todos y utilizable por todas y todos. El acceso y reutilización del conocimiento promueve la colaboración, acelera la innovación e incrementa su impacto para beneficio de toda la sociedad. Y desde la Agencia Nacional de Investigación y Desarrollo estamos comprometidos para que esto ocurra. Estos son los principios en que se inspira la política de acceso abierto, que busca sentar las bases de un nuevo modelo de acceso al conocimiento científico. Para facilitar su implementación en beneficio de toda la comunidad, la Agencia Nacional de Investigación y Desarrollo, la Corporación Cincel y universidades del país, a través de sus bibliotecas universitarias, crean una red nacional de acceso a la información científica, que busca promover el trabajo colaborativo y la articulación entre sus participantes para fortalecer la infraestructura nacional de acceso a la información científica que permita y asegure el acceso abierto al conocimiento científico, potencie las capacidades técnicas instaladas, aumente la visibilidad de los resultados de las investigaciones y entregue servicios de alcance nacional con estándares de calidad mundial. Sé parte de esta red y súmate a esta nueva forma de colaborar. El conocimiento nos cambia la vida. Vivimos constantemente.
Bueno, quisiera contarles que hace una semana vivimos un importante
So I'd like to tell you that a week ago,
nacional de acceso
we saw there was something very interesting happened.
Para profundizar en este tema y contarnos un poquito más, quiero
So to share this with us, I'd like to invite the director of INID, Sen Echeverría. Thank you very much. Here I am. Office. As Jimé said, 1 week ago, we consolidated a project we've been working on for a year and a half. It was aimed at public and private universities to join the open science initiatives and to generate a network to coordinate this access, looking to create a space for discussion and creating a common vision for generating new ways of access to knowledge. This was accepted and by the universities, and it also places the libraries in the center. They're very important actors in terms of access to knowledge, for looking for alternatives in order to encourage this access. This activity was did it in the agency. We wanted to bring people in to share the success of this agreement. But we had to do a little one due to COVID. But that doesn't in any way diminish the attitude of the rectors and universities who supported us. So we made a little video which will enable us to hear from the rectors of the universities and how they understand that this contributes to the development of the country. This agreement is in addition to the concrete measures that have been taken. One of the challenges that we started with 2 years ago was to take specific measures, and we made this visible when we advanced. So this agreement with the universities is a very important step. So it's now the opportunity for us as an agency to recognize the work and the trust that the universities have given us, that the team of the agency has opened up to new challenges, to the libraries, of course, all the panelists who've taken part in this discussion today. So the seminary doesn't finish today, it's continuing tomorrow. So you'll be told about that. So to close today's day, so a week ago, we made this video to share with everybody not only of science, but also the importance that collaboration has, and that we should be developing all together as all part of the ecosystem. So here's the video, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Hoy día tuvimos una actividad muy importante para la agencia, donde firmamos un acuerdo de entendimiento con las universidades públicas y privadas del país.
For the university, the private and public universities, we want to create a network of support for the science ecosystem of the country. So everything that's generated from the agency is available to researchers of the public in general. We're permanently working in this input scientific knowledge to the institutions of the country. It's a small group, but working very much in contact with ministries and the universities. The objective is make available to all the sectors scientific knowledge. First of all, everybody needs to have access, not just one sector or another, but first of all, scientific knowledge. This is a duty of the state. Secondly, everybody should get closer to the knowledge to know about. So there's an important challenge for libraries to make the access to information easier, so that it's understandable for everybody. So if you want to know something about some theme, it should be relatively easy to get. It's a very important step to promote the knowledge as a public good. That knowledge gets caught up in scientific publications is not a good path. We need this knowledge to get to everybody. Knowledge is a public good. So it needs to be available to researchers, but also to communities who make this knowledge theirs. So it's very important for the development of our country. It's also a challenge to know about the laws that are connected to digitalization, the importance of doing digitalization in the right way, so that as a community and as universities, we can get access to all the scientific knowledge. Making information available has always been a theme for us. And now what we did is to transform this necessity, this permanent activity, that make this question a responsibility not just for us, but for the universities and the society as a whole. Technically, it's now important. Now it's now possible to share this knowledge, but it's a challenge for the culture of science. So from the start of a research and to finishing and spreading the results, it's an enormous challenge, and really on a global level as well.
Y tal como lo dijo nuestra directora nacional, con este video que acabamos de compartir, damos por finalizada la jornada de hoy.
So we're now closing the day today with that video. So we're expecting you tomorrow from 9 in the morning Chile time, the ANID channel in YouTube, to continue with this sim. So we have a very interesting Ibero-American panel, and we'll also have a workshop. So see you tomorrow and have a very nice day.